gonna move right into this because we've got quite an agenda tonight, so. If people are here for interest on stuff on the agenda, obviously, you'll kind of know, some of it might be on the consent agenda, and we'll let you know if you have to be here or not, if it's gonna be a long haul. All right, so the approval of the agenda. We have some late items here. Hope, have you got anything else there?
No, just the late items that were circulated by email earlier today.
Okay.
2 with regard to DBP 08, which is for the Little Red Church.
Yeah.
2 in regards to DBP 06, which is on Seaview Place. And there was 1 additional letter that just came in by email. And then there's 7 emails in regard to the short-term rentals, which is item 6.5, and an additional 1 that came in by email a little bit earlier today.
Okay, perfect. And Sue Ellen, you had something?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could add to the bottom down there at 11.6, UBCM and Climate March, just to let the community know
About what?
what councillors were busy with on council time on Friday and all last week.
Yeah. What we had for breakfast? Okay, that's good. We'll put it in 11.6 and approval of the agenda as amended.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. And second, Rob, thank you. All in favor? Okay, thank you. So public comments. Hopefully you got a list.
We have 4.
All right.
Starting with nearest pool regarding short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. And nearest pool. You need my address?
Welcome.
I live in Eagle Cliff. I haven't been here for a while, but your short-term rental policy got me agitated. So I'm here. And I just would like to ask you to consider reviewing the policy as it stands. I know it's a draft policy. I know it's going to an open house and to some of the committees, but I think it needs to be reviewed even before it goes there. And the reason I think so is because I think you've made a mistake with allowing single-family dwellings to be used for seasonal use, seasonal rental use. And I also think you made a mistake for allowing single-family dwellings with secondary suites. I noticed that in the bylaw it says, or the policy, it says that the secondary suites won't be allowed, but as seasonal rentals, but the main dwelling will be, and I'm willing to bet that anybody with that situation will be living in their secondary suite and using the main dwelling. So the idea, as referenced in the policy, that somehow these secondary suites will be retained as rentals for the community is a joke if you allow single-family dwellings to be used. I'd ask you too as to why it says in your planner's report, and I quote under feedback considerations, entire home rentals receive the most concern for potential negative impacts. Yet you proceeded to direct your staff, I assume, to include single-family dwellings as seasonal rentals. And I would be interested in seeing the survey results if they're available, but obviously from that one statement, it's clear that there are a lot of people, and I know from talking to people, there are a lot of people very upset at the idea that every single home on this island can be used for seasonal rental. It might be 4 months straight, different occupant every single night. It might be every single weekend of the year. And I have some experience from where I live in Eagle Cliff with a single-family home that was used for a couple of years. It was a party house, and it was not good. People were very upset with it. That house is no longer being used that way. It was bought, and the owners live in it. So I'm certainly concerned about the policy as it currently stands. I know in the policy you mentioned mitigation of impacts. Well, I say, who's going to pay for that? Good neighbor policy, parking issues, having a property agent nearby that you can contact. Who's going to pay for that? It's going to be the taxpayers that will be paying to enforce this. And I think think rather than having an enforcement of something like this, then let's just say no to single-family dwellings. We currently have a bylaw that has worked, and that is allowing bed and breakfasts where there is an owner in the house, and that has worked. And I know we have a number of places on island that have been unlawful. And I heard some references, probably maybe it was from somebody I was talking to about grandfathering. You don't grandfather unlawful uses. You grandfather uses that were existing at the time they were lawful, and then they become unlawful as a result of a bylaw. You do not grandfather unlawful uses. I think this bylaw has been drafted to represent the interests of a very few on the island, and I would suggest that perhaps it be looked at again and reconsidered. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joan Viner regarding same.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Joan Viner. I'm the Chair of Tourism Bowen Island. Tourism Bowen Island does support the draft proposal for the short-term vacation rental policy and the plan to apply for the Municipal Regional Destination Tax, the MRDT. The potential funding source will improve the responsible destination management and visitor experience provided by Tourism Bowen Island, as well as provide funding for currently proposed and potential affordable housing projects. The Tourism Bowen Island does have a couple of concerns about the arbitrary number of STR nights that has been included in the policy. We're not sure where that number came from. This limitation on rental nights may be detrimental to the accommodation providers. We look forward to an opportunity to work with the council and staff to develop a robust and advantageous policy regarding short-term rentals and applying for the MRDT. And we would be happy to engage the principals at the MRDT to come and do some workshops with council and staff if you would like. It's a more complicated process than we would like to believe, and we'd like to participate with you. We certainly believe that the MRDT will provide much needed resources to sustain a key segment of the Bowen Island economy and to provide affordable housing opportunities for residents in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David Mason regarding section 3.3, which is church.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. Here once again, the opportunity to speak with you regarding section 3.3, that's the development variance permit application from the Little Red Church, and also the second recommendation regarding the parking area for the Little Red Church. I first want to acknowledge the contribution of staff, particularly Jennifer, who have been most helpful in deriving an alternative, an affordable alternative to an easement as proposed and as recommended by that council on the September 7th meeting. Staff has been very diligent, very cooperative, very pleasant in working through this. I want to compliment them at this time. And I am hopeful that you will review the proposal in a positive way. Thank you.
Maria, short-term rentals.
Hi, Murray Atherton, 1477 Clear Road, right beside one of the illegal houses that has been rented probably for the past 8 years on a short-term vacation rental basis. And I've got to say that with a good owner, with some legislation, with a good neighbor policy that has got some teeth in it, I have never had one complaint. I've never made a complaint, I've never had to phone the owner with any problems, just because those people, they sign their life away when they rent the accommodation beside us. And that's what they should do. There should be some really good rules and regulations on it. It's wonderful that the rules and regulations and the legislation is being considered and being done, because it's really needed. As somebody who's spent about 19 years trying to develop a tourism economy on this island, it's really good to see that things are actually coming together now. We don't have a hotel, we don't have a motel, we don't have glamping, we don't have any other form of creating the greenest economy we can have on this island, which is tourism dollars. The people who stay in short-term vacation rentals go to the restaurants. I talk to the people who stay next door, and they can name off virtually every restaurant, every store on this island. They come in, they spend money. A year-round economy is what we've been working towards for a number of years. I take a lot of the credit and blame for the number of people that do come to our shores, but we'd like to be able to spread that out. We'd like to be able to manage it. That is why I stepped down as chair of Tourism Bowen, because I'm a sales guy, I'm not a manager. And have people like Joan who have come on board with Tourism Bowen, and I'm going to take it to that next step. Just like to thank Emma, who's not here, for all her hard work on this project. It's been great.
Thank you, Mark.
And last, Peter Williamson regarding the same.
Hello. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Peter Williamson, 1471 Tunstall Boulevard, Bowen Island. I'm very conscious of the benefits of tourism on Bowen Island and elsewhere, having actually done my PhD on tourism. But I'm also conscious that there's a housing crisis on Bowen Island. So I'd like to comment on the proposed short-term rental policy. Short-term rentals are a considerable nuisance in certain areas, and it seems very clear that they have contributed to forcing up rental accommodation on the island. I see that the policy proposes to allow short-term rentals, which I read Airbnb, for up to 120 nights a year.
Excuse me, I'm having trouble hearing. If we can have one conversation, thank you.
So I see that the policy proposes to allow short-term rentals, for which I read Airbnb, for up to 120 nights a year. Would that be 120 consecutive nights, or would that be 2 nights a week throughout the entire year? I see also that comments from one Airbnb operator state that she rents out her property for an average of 210 nights a year, and is arguing for being able to continue this. If it is to be 120 nights or even more, spread across the entire year, it means that some residents on Bowen might get no respite throughout the year. The documents also suggest to me that Council is considering applying to have a municipal regional district tax, MRDT, levied on short-term rentals. I have no problem with that. And then dispersing these funds raised, apparently it seems, to Birch and the Tourism Bowen Island. I wouldn't have a problem with that either. However, I am concerned that the net effect of allowing virtually any property to be used as an Airbnb rental for at least some considerable part of the year would be to remove more rental properties from the available inventory, and a consequent increase in the scarcity of rentals on the island. And that will have the obvious effect of driving up rents. So I'm not convinced that such a course would be the best way to address the housing problems. Will Council please indicate to the ratepayers what these proposals are? How would the revenue be divided between Birch and Tourism Bowen Island? Will Council also indicate how much revenue they expect to generate in this way? An enormous amount would have to be generated to offset the greater scarcity of rental accommodation and the greater price. Are we certain that this money would not be used to provide affordable accommodation for a small number of current tenants on Bowen Island, while leaving the rest even worse off? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. All right, that's it, Hope?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to, thank you all. Move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody have anything you'd like to have pulled out of there? Allison?
I'm trying to find the one, where is it?
Vote.
Emma's report on the path, Miller Road.
The pedestrian network,
Yeah.
310.
Section 12, for you, Allison. Anybody else? Okay, that's awesome. All right, can I have a motion to?
Can I just suggest,
Yeah.
is required for Emma to answer some questions?
Yeah.
We don't want her to go to the end of the meeting.
Yeah, no, we'll arrange that, yeah, for sure. Let's just put it up to the top there.
Put it up after 6.1 or something after
Okay, so,
Oh,
okay, we have first and second over here, and all in favor of approving the consent agenda, thank you. As amended, moving forward.
So you might want to mention to the audience that we just approved a whole bunch of the development variance permits in the consent agenda.
We just approved 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, all the way down to.
Approved a lot of, anyway, I sort of mentioned that at the beginning, if anybody had something that was in there that,
All the way down to 317, except for 310.
okay, so that's, we're gonna move on to delegations. Family Deb. Yeah, Deputy Cortez Merriman, President, and Susanna Braun, past President, Coast Animal Welfare and Education Society, cause. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councillors.
Yeah, pleasure.
We submitted a piece of document for your consideration. We're here because we would like to establish a closer dialogue with Council, because good things come out of collaborating, and that's mentioned in item 5 on education and coordination. Working with Council, with a Council grant that was given us about a year ago, we produced 2 pamphlets that were circulated to the community on rat poison and living with skunks, and that was a close and very, very good collaboration with Sophie in particular, and we would like to do more of that in the future, and that fulfills our E of our name, our education mandate. Now, there are quite a lot of issues in this document, so Deb and I would just like to draw your attention to a couple of them. And we really would like to hear from Council what you would like to see CAWS doing. So the first one is feral and stray cats. Now, the reason for the foundation of CAWS 19 years ago was because there was a huge feral cat problem on the island, and I don't know if you know what the multipliers are, but feral cats can reproduce at an extraordinary rate. They're breeding very, very quickly, and then if you multiply each female cat having a litter of 3 or 4, you can get into thousands of cats very quickly. So with a lot of hard work, the founding members through the years got the problem down to virtually 0. Unfortunately, there are members of the community who still bring intact feral cats onto the island to work as barn cats, but of course to work as barn cats they don't feed them, and because they're supposed to catch the rodents, but then the feral cats sometimes find that by spreading out, they will find easier pickings elsewhere. So then you get all these interactions with domestic cats, fighting and pregnancies and so on, and it is a problem. And so we do know that there are individuals who continue to do this, such as the individual who actually took CAWS to the BC Supreme Court 2 years ago on a related issue, which was found in our favour, because we had done nothing wrong. So some of the problems that come are the spread of feline leukemia, thank you, and other diseases, and of course feral cats will be taking the bird population as well. So we're ramping up our activities right now for trap, spay, neuter and release, which is what we do, and we have volunteers who man these feeding stations where you have to habituate the cats to coming in before you can trap them, and then we work closely with the vet to get them neutered, and then we release them. So we believe that we've actually saved the Muni an awful lot of money since the year 2000 when CAUSE was founded, and we do seek ongoing support for this work. Our funds are much depleted, and we're kind of, the ones who've been on the board for a while are a little bit burned out in terms of fundraising. So we would like to ask the Muni to consider funding CAUSE on an ongoing basis. Another thing we'd like to bring to your attention is the question of stray cats, because we do have a number of people who have domestic cats who are intact and who are out in the community and who are also reproducing and fighting and killing birds and so on. And there are a number of other municipalities in the neighbourhood that have a bylaw, and we actually could provide the Muni with a bylaw if desired. We have a draft which you could consider if you would like to have a cat regulation bylaw, which would require owners to keep their intact cats indoors, and if the cats are intact, to make sure that the cats that go outside are tattooed for identification. So we'd like to put that to you as a proposal for your consideration, and we can work with you. We can produce some text, which if you were interested, you could then give to staff to work on. So those are the main things that I want to emphasise, and I think I'll hand over to Bev now.
Okay, so this is about money. Get that money.
Cut to the chase.
Cut to the chase. So Susanna had mentioned that we've suffered burnout over the years after 19 years of really hard work of getting rid of the cat issue and celebrating that last year as Iris passed, and she was our big stalwart supporter on that and was very much a part of that. So here we are now a year later, and it's starting to explode, and it's to gather up more volunteers to go and trap and spay, neuter, et cetera, it's going to become a problem. And unless we are able to have some assistance in dealing with that, you know, we're a bunch of, how would I say this, older ladies who are
We do have a couple of guys on the board.
Yes, we do, yeah. But and we have 3 lovely ladies who come in and fresh blood, etc. But you know, to go in and waste the amount of time that we have. I shouldn't say it's waste. It's not a waste, but the amount of time we have to go in to create this funding. When we feel that we had a collaboration and an arrangement where we could work together to make this a backing by the Muni to say, hey, listen, this is an island-wide problem and we're all responsible and we all need to pitch in and help and eradicate this again, because it is very, very quickly becomes a problem and becomes overrun. So that's the first part of that. The second part of the funding situation is we've, over the last 3 or 4 years, taken to helping a number of the less fortunate members of the community with their vet bills. And this is a sticky wicket. It's a really tough subject to talk about because you're helping people and hoping that they'll pay back, and you know, a lot of the time they don't, and because it's so tough to raise money, because you know, a lot of people think we're invisible. They don't see the physical value in front of them of what we do. And so we're sort of forgotten, and if there is priorities of raising money, we're not at the top of the list. And so we feel that if we had some sort of official cooperation that says, okay, this could be sort of a community-driven kind of a project where we're helping each other. And so these people who are providing terrific homes for these animals who would otherwise end up in a shelter, etc., would have an ability to keep their animals at home and enjoy the benefits of having animals at home. But just need that little bit of extra help. And so if we had a little bit of help trying to do that, it would certainly enable us to pay it forward and continue to have those funds. So it wouldn't be that we necessarily grant that to these people, but would say, hey, with the backing of someone other than ourselves, that we can say, listen, this is a loan, this is, you know, even if it's $50 a month payback, it's something. And even if we don't get the whole amount back, it's you know, just having responsibility for having that animal and doing the best for them. And I think as a community, we should all be, you know, looking at our most vulnerable segment, which is our four-legged, you know, partners. So that's basically the two key sections. And the third one is, you know, educational events are really a tough one, because I think, like a lot of things here on Bowen, there's a lot of apathy on the weekends, et cetera, going out to different events. And, you know, as much as we publish and publicize having an event, a case in point is how many of us complain about the mice and the rats that we find around our homes and in the communities, et cetera. We all do it. We all go, oh my God. And yet, was it last year, we had this really lovely guy who actually comes and helps with that problem on Bowen, and does it humanely. And with all the publicity, I think, what, 12 people showed up?
Yeah.
So 12 people out of 1,500 odd households, that's how many actually were interested enough to come and hear very valuable advice of what this fellow had to say. So if there's some way that we can jointly collaborate or do something where we have a little bit of, sort of a little bit of oomph and muscle behind us to put our best foot forward. And so that means that we're not just sort of, you know, spinning our wheels and getting very frustrated in the process, feeling that, oh, we're the four-legged group, you know, and you know, so therefore we're at the bottom of the priority list. So we just think it would be terrific if we could have a cooperation and move that forward a little bit. So that obviously means a lot of thought and a lot of discussion and taking time, but we would really welcome a start on that. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, we certainly appreciate what you do. There's no question about that. And, you know, the thing is, like you said, it's very, you know, it's not seen what you do. It's all done sort of,
Yeah.
it's just not highly visible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would, if you grant money, I mean, you apply for the grants, you do that. Foundation, you do, private foundation, and then Knick-Knack Nook, and
We've been told in the past that we're not the kind of, we don't match their criteria, but we're working on that. One of our new board members, that's her brief to take that forward. And we will certainly be applying in April for the regular grant in aid, is that what it's called?
yes, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We did apply for a multi-year core funding grant,
Yes.
and we were not successful in
No.
getting that. And
Yeah, that was very specific, unfortunately. It actually, we looked at other communities and say, well, there are other communities funding this and that sort of thing. You know, but like the SPCA, I don't think would be funded by the municipalities, I don't know. But that's your equivalent on the mainland, I would say.
well, PAF, I believe it was PAF several years ago, received
Pacific Animal Foundation.
Received a $10,000 grant from the District of North Vancouver for spay neuter. So that sort of became like a partnership, and there is precedent for that through the Lower Mainland. There are other groups that will fund that. PetSmart Charities is one of them, but they have such a competition, and they really do concentrate on the larger, more prevalent areas in the province and across Canada that seems to be a little bit more concerning. Where I think we're tiny, so we might be too tiny.
We, and the BCSPCA, sometimes they run competitions where you can apply for funding. We did have a couple of thousand one year for spay neuter, which paid for the spaying of about 10 cats, so that was, which was all we needed that particular year. But those don't come up every year. That was a special initiative by the BCSPCA.
And we feel that if we have a little bit of backing of a group of substance and sort of a municipal group, we can sit down with our vets and have a little bit more muscle there too, to say, hey, listen, this is a community problem, and you know, you need to do your part too, and give us a break on the fees, because you know, now that we have a new vet, that's being a little bit, you know.
Of course,
So step by step.
Yeah, so we'd like to be a little bit more.
It's like we fall in the gap between the multi-year funding criteria and then the grant in aid. It's a lot of work to do that every year. I mean, obviously, there are bits of the form where you can repeat, but because you require specific projects to be delineated, But often our projects are very similar to the previous year, which is why we feel that maybe we're falling into a little bit of a gap, which maybe council could consider.
Yeah, it's something we can certainly discuss. David first.
Yep, thanks for your work and thanks for the presentation, but what sort of funding are you looking for? Yeah.
Well, ideally, something like 5,000 a year would be absolutely fantastic. The grant in aid, of course, when we get that, and we have been very successful, you have been very generous to us when we've applied. We've usually received either the full amount, 2,000, or if we've asked for less, we've received whatever we asked for. Even that would make a difference. I mean, our budget through the year is probably about 30K. So that's an awful lot of fundraising that we have to do. And obviously if we don't have 30K, there are going to be fewer members of the community that we can help with their vet bills and so on.
We also have to understand that for spaying a cat is obviously a lot less than a dog, but still, depending on where you go, that can be anywhere from the SPCA rate in town, which might be $150, but up here on the Bowen, it might be $300, or North Vancouver. And so, you take a grant of a couple $1,000s, that may be 6 to 8 cats. But if you've got a feral problem starting up and there's kittens coming out, and one cat has 4 kittens here, and the other one has 4 kittens over there, all of a sudden that's 10 cats within the space of weeks, and there's your funds gone. And so that requires sitting down with the vet to say, okay, let's have a specific package for this, and are you on board? And with the feral cats, once you catch them, you pretty much got to take them in right away. You can't leave them in a cage overnight and all this sort of thing, because it really freaks them out. So you want to have that done fairly quickly. So having it on island is actually the most ideal. So as you can imagine, the last year was rather interesting in trying to ferry things on and off. So that would be something that we think would be a useful thing to be able to do.
Maureen, you got something?
2 things. I was wondering if you had talked with any of the veterinary programs. There is a veterinary assistance program at Douglas College, and the head is a vet, Dr. Colleen Lowe, and I can give you her contact information because I know that they work with an organization in Washington State that does a great deal of work dealing with feral cats, and they have connections throughout the province where their vet assistants have found placements. So I'll send that information to you, Suzanne.
Yes, you have my email.
Yeah. And then the second question I had was, if cause wasn't here and we were suddenly overrun by feral cats because nothing had been done, is there a municipal department that would be on the hook to respond?
I have no idea.
I don't think so at this
I
point.
think it depends on what the service level and mandate of the municipality. Some do and some don't. But I don't know.
I think we have an animal control bylaw, but I don't know that.
They're the only
No,
ones.
dogs, yeah. And however, that's possible, and another way of looking at it is through an invasive species lens. And we're already, the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee is looking at invasive plants. And because they cause all kinds of problems, including property damage and damage to watersheds and things like that. And possibly that might be a useful lens to look through in terms of grants and things. And with climate change, there's going to be more patterns and systems are changing. And I don't know whether that feral cats would be more of a problem, but they do kill a lot of wildlife.
Yeah.
And I'm, conscious that nature is something peaceful. Nature full of birdsong and things is something that people on Bowen value. So I don't know. I just
it's true.
offer a different window to look through.
Thank you.
Different lens.
I was just wondering if there might be a conversation down the road with Bonnie, the manager of Parks and Environment, just to see,
Went for lunch with her on Wednesday.
Perfect. So our Parks and Environment manager is coming back.
Anyway, Michael?
Firstly, thank you both. I mean, we've known calls for a long time. And kind of to round on this conversation, you are the only organisation of this type on the island. Yeah.
Yes.
I can see, by the way, very respectfully, why you are, because this is hugely hard work. So the actual funding to try and put dollars and cents to this you were looking for would be helpful, as you said, was in the region of 5,000.
Yep.
Your annual budget, you know you're going to have to raise it, of course. Did I hear you right? And if I didn't, correct me. Was it? Did you say 30,000?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it actually, for cause to be operational, you know one way or another you're going to have to raise $30,000.
Yep, that's right.
And if it wasn't for cause, and I think this is Councillor Nicholson's point, without cause, then this problem then falls into somebody else's hands. I just want to make sure I've got my, in support of what you're doing, and I've got my numbers and my thinking right on this.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
If there is somebody else's hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. What I would like you to do is, could you write a formal letter to Mayor and Council?
Yes.
And with the ask, and that'll start the conversation going, and we'll see.
We'll gladly do that.
Thank you. From there.
Again, my thanks for what you're doing. Can you add some statistics into that?
Yes, we have statistics. Iris was absolutely brilliant at statistics. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. All right, staff reports. 5.1, Shauna Jennings. Public art policy appendices. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm here to bring forward 4 appendices that we would like to recommend are amended for the public art program and policy. The public art program and policy was adopted by Council about a year ago on October 9th, 2018. Shortly after that, the Public Art Advisory Committee was formed, and part of their work was to develop procedures, which are what we're bringing forward tonight. And these procedures will work to inform guide decisions and work to implement the public art policy. So there are 4 procedures, appendices that we are bringing forward. One of them is the acquisition, donation, adjudication, and deaccession of various public art artworks. So I'll just give a little brief synopsis of each of these procedures, and maybe if there's any comments, welcome those after each one. It might be the easiest way to do that. So we'll start with acquisition. So acquiring artwork for the public art program. Those artworks may be acquired by purchase or by the municipality commissioning artwork, donations, community art projects, or private development initiatives. In this case, the council would have the final decision around acquiring those art pieces with recommendation from the Public Art Advisory Committee, selection panels, and relevant committees that would be that would have vetted and reviewed the artworks. Key criteria for acquiring the art are detailed in the procedure. They include things like budget for installation, budget for future maintenance, that the artwork would be site appropriate, durable, able to withstand the seasons, assuming that it's outdoors. As the acquisition goes forward, there would be a signed agreement that would transfer ownership of the artwork to them, and then maintenance plan would be put in place, and that would be part of the part of working with that. So that was the first acquisition procedure. Anyone have any changes, comments? Just keep going.
Yeah.
The second one is the donation procedure. It might happen that someone wishes to donate an artwork to the municipality. In that case, a letter of intent would be submitted to the Public Art Advisory Committee, and it would outline details of the artwork, the artist profile, probably a rendition of the art, what the average lifespan would be expected to be, the value, That letter of intent would be evaluated by the Public Art Advisory Committee and would evaluate the artwork based on criteria such as appropriateness, how it fits in with BIM's theme for public art, things like maintenance and public safety, as well as municipal liability. So if it's something that can be climbed on, what are the mitigating factors around that? In that case, the Public Art Advisory Committee would recommend the donation to council, who would again have the final decision. Allison?
So the bequests one,
Yes.
I know you've said in here that it's subject to the acquisition of such named criteria, but I know many organizations have been left with what I'll call white elephants.
Okay.
So I was thinking it might be good to add a couple of lines in there to make it very clear that you don't have to accept the bequest. Or if you do, that you could sell the art. And also a line maybe encouraging people to do advanced estate planning and discuss the bequest with you in advance. So that you don't end up with those heirs that are very unhappy because you didn't want the piece of art. And,
Okay.
and I don't know how if it's in a bequest, the funding would be there to look after it.
And that is part of the donation, working out that agreement with the municipality,
Yeah,
is that
but
ideally.
if you just put it in your will, and then all of a sudden there you are, and you're just getting
Right.
this thing. Yeah. I think we need to make it clear to people that you don't have to accept it, or if you accept it, you're gonna sell.
Okay.
That was it for that section.
Okay. Sorry, ensuring funding for ongoing maintenance. Okay. So then the next one, Appendix C, would be adjudication procedure, in which case BIM would be commissioning a public art project for a specific, probably for a specific site. That would be done through a selection panel who would, it is detailed in the procedure as to the membership of that panel, as well as relevant municipal departments, committees, special interest groups who may have, may be consulted along with that. Panelists should have a good understanding of the project for which the art is being selected, so the municipality would need to pull criteria together and make sure that everybody was aware of what the intent of acquiring that art was. A detailed selection criteria is listed in the procedure as well, and it would guide any recommendations that would come to council. Again, council has final approval, and once a selection was made for that commissioned piece of art, BIM would enter into an agreement with the artist around delivery of that art, installation, ongoing maintenance, and the ownership would again transfer to BIM. Allison?
Your very first paragraph, the one I've got most questions about. You said the PAC will approve the members. Why are they not appointed?
We can appoint them.
Because somebody's got to actually appoint them. And then I guess I'm confused as to why you're creating a selection panel and not using the actual PAC.
It does have 2 PAC members on the panel, but I think the intent was to bring in other representatives from the community and people who may have some connection to the project that's being considered.
Okay, so then the follow-up to that is the purpose of the panel is to select the best proposal.
Yes.
But isn't the decision to actually commission it is a council decision?
That's right,
And so wouldn't the wording be better that the purpose of the panel is to recommend to the PAC the best, to make a recommendation of the PAC on which
yes.
And the PAC would then have to make a recommendation to council, right?
Yes. I think that's.
Maybe beside 1, instead of select the best proposal, recommend the
Yeah,
best
recommend the
proposal.
best proposal.
So I'm looking at the second
Yeah,
second
but-
line on page 27.
So point one is the second sentence, or the third sentence,
It says the purpose of the panel is to select.
is to
Oh,
recommend.
is to
Is to
recommend
recommend.
the best
Yeah.
proposal
Yeah,
to the PAC,
and,
and then that recommendation would go to council.
yeah. Okay. Just reading all my little things, okay. And then going down about 4 pages to where you're actually talking about interviewing the finalists.
Yes.
I thought artists' work habits was a very odd choice of words, and I was wondering if qualifications would be better.
Yeah, I can change that to qualifications.
That was it on that one.
Okay. Anything else?
I like that you've got a different process for small projects. Usually put
Yeah.
that-
All right. So one more is the accession procedure. So at some point, the municipality may wish to deaccession a piece of public art, and that could be done through sale, exchange, gifting, or appropriate dismantling. Conditions that might lead to that might be that the artwork has been damaged or vandalized. There may become excessive maintenance that may be prohibitive to the municipality. Public safety might become a concern, or just relevance in the community. It may be that it isn't relevant any longer to have that piece of art. The Public Art Advisory Committee will evaluate the artwork and recommend council approve the deaccessioning. Every attempt will be made to notify the artist in that instance, and then the decision, we may work with the artist to come to a decision around what to do with the piece of artwork. And then council again would have the final say in deaccessioning.
Michael?
I don't have actually no problem with it. My question is, these terms which are written so clearly here, when the donation is made in the first place, is the donor the artist? Are they made aware of this and sign up on these terms?
Yes, yeah, so that would be
Have
part of the.
Have I missed that
agreement.
somewhere? Should I make that?
No, that would be part of the agreement, which hasn't been developed yet, but part of the agreement with the artist would be to let them know that the deaccessioning is possible down the road.
I'm dealing with an estate issue where deaccessioning is causing a monstrous legal problem because the argument is that it was never made clear to the donor when it was first given in the first place. It's now subject to litigation.
Okay, so that should be in any agreement that we
Just
enter.
make sure it's in the meeting.
It just, however you decide to please, but that someone going into this, be they the artist or the donor, is actually aware that under these terms, these are the rules, and they know it at the time. It would save you a lot of legal, a lot of legal problems later on.
Okay, thank you.
And then I've got a couple of questions on the conditions. You're talking about you can get rid of it if it's inferior quality, or the quality or authenticity is debatable and subsequently justified, and it's determined to be fraudulent or inauthentic. Why would we not have found that out in the first place?
Ideally, we would have, and that would be part of the adjudication and the acquisition procedure.
Yeah.
Sometimes things fall through the cracks.
Come to light later on.
Okay, and then the
Come to light later.
The next page, it's in the middle, you've got, it will be placed for sale at auction, in a gallery, or by direct bidding, in compliance with laws governing surplus policy.
Property.
Surplus property. The only entity I can think of that's got surplus property rules are the province and the feds. We don't have any, do we? So I wondered if you took this from a federal or provincial gallery policies, because
Maybe we just put in, subject to municipal procedures and policies, and that would
Yeah,
cover any future
yeah.
policies.
I just couldn't think of any reason what laws would be around that would be governing.
Sorry, Kathy, could you repeat?
I think just current and future municipal policies.
Municipal policies is maybe amended from time to time.
Yes.
In accordance with municipal policies that can be amended, that may be amended, as amended from time to time. That's it.
Okay. Okay. In terms of financial implications of any of these procedures, we're just looking at staff time in implementing those. Having these procedures in place will assist the Public Arts Advisory Committee in implementation of the Public Art Program and Policy. And it is the recommendation of the Public Art Advisory Committee that Council amend the Public Art Program and Policy number 18004 to include appendices A, B, C, and D as laid out here in the attachments.
As amended.
As amended.
As amended. Any further discussion?
I'm happy to propose it.
Yeah.
Second.
I thought it was very straightforward,
Well done.
really good presentation, thank you very much. Sean.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great.
Seconder on that?
No, I wasn't here.
Okay,
The other.
you're on.
We're not
Yeah,
quite
that's
there.
great. Any further discussion? No, thank you, all in favor? Wonderful, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a comment, we have a deeply functional public art committee.
I like that, deeply functional.
Deeply functional.
Okay, 6.1, business arising from minutes, Emma Chow, redevelopment variance permit, 971 Seaview Place. Hi.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Council. Just recovering from a cold, so bear with me. Let me know if I need to speak louder. This is actually just a recap of the introduction to the variance for 971 Seaview Place. This is a property located in the Cates Hill neighborhood. And it is a fairly small property. I believe it's about 0.01 hectares. And it is asking for, I'm going to skip through the background, a reduction in the side setback and an increase in the maximum allowed height. So it is a 0.5 meter reduction in the side setback and a 0.16 meter increase in the height. The application is coming to council today for consideration, but staff is asking for a deferral of the consideration to the next council meeting because of the number of comments received from the neighbors and the consistent nature of the comments. Staff would like a bit more time to work with the applicant and the neighbors to come to a resolution before bringing the application back to council with some proposed conditions.
We drove, I was just wondering, is it the brown house with the brown metal roof?
It's a
Because there's no
black.
picture of the house in the, well, all you can see from the
Charcoal.
street is a brown metal roof. So is that it?
It's charcoal.
There's a metal roof, it's like a light aluminum color roof.
Not brown?
The roof is
Let's
metal.
have a site visit.
Well, we're definitely going to have a site
Yes.
visit. I just wanted to know if I'm driven by the right thing. Is it got a set of stairs coming down between CV Place and Village Drive? You said?
No.
It's not that one.
That is 2 properties over. Yeah. This one is quite large, I think you'll notice. And
I'd like to make the recommendation.
Yeah, no, I support the recommendation. I'm very glad you made the suggestion to defer this and to negotiate with the applicants. When I read all the letters, well, when we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, you know, it's just a tiny little bit to the side and a little bit above, but when you look at the house, it's huge. And it really stands out. So I really liked your recommendation. I certainly support it.
I move that the council defer consideration of development variance permit DVP 06219 to the October 15, 2019 council meeting, and that council direct staff to schedule a site visit to 971 Seaview Place prior to consideration.
Can I just suggest before that's moved, if there wants to be a council discussion, it has to be before it's moved and seconded. Once you move deferral, there's some more conversation.
No, if anybody else wants to say anything.
Is there any further comments before somebody seconds this? No? Okay. I'll second it. And all in favor? Thank you. That's deferred. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And, okay, so now we're gonna move to our committee of the whole. We're in, the recommendation is council will move to the committee of the whole to discuss the draft short-term rental policy. Emma, back to you.
Back to me.
Did you vote on moving to committee?
No.
Okay.
I'll move that.
Okay, you move in second. Somebody over here, thank you, all in favor? Okay, so we move to the committee. Now, it's on to you, Emma.
The short-term rental project, back in February of this year, council approved a work program and public participation plan to help develop a short-term rental policy for Bowen Island. This project started off in March of this year with a review of existing conditions and comparable municipalities. This was followed by several months of community engagement, and in August we started drafting a policy that is now before you. And I'm just going to recap the first few phases that helped inform this policy. During the review phase, we found that Bowen Island has an exceptionally high seasonal population, over 20%, and they are an integral part of the community on the island here. An online search also revealed 123 short-term rental listings back in January. This was from host compliance data. And almost all of those listings, 89%, were entire homes being listed for short-term rental. And but at the same time, we also got results from our 2018 island survey that revealed a lack of long-term rental housing is the top housing challenge for Bowen Island. We reviewed 22 comparable municipalities and found that almost all of them use business licensing to regulate short-term rentals. And a few municipalities that have high seasonal populations, like we do here, have been using a special type of business license to regulate seasonal rentals, so entire homes that are rented out seasonally. During the engagement phase, we aimed to fulfill 4 objectives: to foster project awareness, provide information on the project, identify key community needs, and maintain communications with the public. We used a wide variety of communication tools to reach 4 key stakeholder groups that were made up of citizens, government, economic development, and operators. We undertook 11 engagement initiatives. I won't go through all of them, but I think you've seen results from all of them detailed in previous reports. And from this engagement feedback, we got a high degree of support for some level of regulation, especially to help mitigate negative impacts to the community, be it the neighborhood character and safety, or impacts on rental housing availability and affordability. We also saw a lot of support for bed and breakfasts, existing ones that we have in the community that have been operating for many years without any concerns. People really supported this type of short-term rental operation where the operator is a resident and they're only using a portion of their home for short-term rental use. As far as the number of regulatory tools that were proposed, business licensing got the most support by far, as well as the requirement for a local contact. So this is someone that can be reached on island for the full duration of short-term rental operation. We received the most concerns around entire homes being used for short-term rentals, especially those that are being rented to large groups that can often cause a lot of disruptive behavior, and landlords that are usually not present on the island to address concerns as they come up. We also got a lot of feedback on secondary suites being used as short-term rentals, and these comments fell into 2 main groups. First group being that secondary suites should be used for long-term rental and should not be allowed for short-term rental. And the second group were people that actually wanted to use their secondary suites for short-term rental with the argument that their suite is not suitable for long-term rental. In many of those cases, they mean that it's not a fully self-contained dwelling unit, doesn't have proper kitchen, living, sleeping areas for long-term rental. With that feedback, we jumped into the policy development phase with the objective to create a regulatory approach that is fair and will help mitigate negative impacts on the community. The key considerations in drafting this policy was really using a residents-first approach. And this we're talking about being very mindful of how short-term rentals may impact our neighborhoods and long-term housing stock, as well as holding operators accountable for such impacts. We also want the policy to require business licenses for short-term rentals. This is both bed and breakfast as well as other types of short-term rentals should all require business licenses. And we want to look at allowing seasonal rentals. I'll get a little bit more into that, but that's essentially allowing entire homes to be used for short-term rentals. And to ensure that the policy is proposing an approach that maintains a fair playing field for operators that are already complying with the current regulations. They shouldn't be penalized for following the rules as they are right now. And also, we always want to make sure that the policy proposed is going to be viable down the road in terms of enforcement and implementation. With that in mind, staff is presenting a policy made up mainly of 3 parts: bylaw requirements, enforcement measures, and taxation. The first part, for bylaw, we're looking at amending some of our definitions. The existing bed and breakfast definition, we would like to clarify by adding that it may contain limited kitchen facilities. This has been a long-standing point of difficulty in distinguishing what exactly a bed and breakfast unit looks like on the ground. So we believe by adding this small phrase, we can help to give clarity to what a bed and breakfast physically is allowed. We also define limited kitchen facilities, essentially allowing plug-in countertop cooking appliances, a mini fridge, and a small sink. So this is the distinguishing factor between a full-blown dwelling unit and entire home that might be used for a short-term rental that would have a full kitchen, oven, dishwasher, etc. This is really making it specific what is allowed in a bed and breakfast. And the key definition amendment will be adding in the seasonal rental definition, which is essentially a short-term rental use allowed in an entire dwelling up to 120 days per calendar year, with a maximum guest capacity of 2 adults per bedroom. And this is really based on best practices, what we've found in other communities that have put cap on their seasonal rentals, as well as the number of days in operation, as well as the occupancy cap. The other bylaw requirements will involve a lot of amendments to our current business licensing bylaw to require that seasonal rentals have a license. We'd also like to require that all advertising for short-term rentals display a business license number. We feel this is a fairly basic minimum requirement that is not onerous on operators and is used widely across other municipalities. Seasonal rentals will also be required to enter into a good neighbor agreement. I think this term has come up quite a bit even earlier tonight. Our good neighbor agreement, the policy calls for one to be drafted, so we don't have one yet. If the policy is adopted, then we'll bring forward drafts for council's review. But essentially the agreement will be asking for that local contact information, and that type of information is shared with neighbors as well as the municipality and be posted publicly. It also acknowledges that there are other regulatory bylaws, such as the noise bylaw, the real property bylaw, to make sure that the impacts from the short-term rentals are minimized. In terms of enforcement measures, we are really sticking with our current bylaw services investigation policy 14005, and that is a complaint basis policy that we use for all of our enforcement. We really try to be work with the community for compliance, and the policy details out actually a warning before issuing of any bylaw notices. So once they get to 3 notices, that actually means they've gone through 3 warnings as well. And I feel that's quite a long process to get to, but if you do somehow manage to get 3 notices, then we should look at revoking their business license. And I think this will be the main stick, if you will, for compliance, still in following that the intent of that bylaw services investigation policy. And the last portion, the municipal and regional district tax, which has also been brought up earlier this year, is a tax program that is meant to provide revenue to municipalities to help with tourism and affordable housing initiatives. We can ask for up to 3% tax, and council specifies the percentage going to either tourism or affordable housing. And the application is quite complicated and usually takes at least a year. So this would take place in tandem with the bylaw amendments, as mentioned earlier, so the implementation can be in tandem. And I think that's pretty much all the bits and pieces. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, Allison?
Thanks, Emma. I'm still having trouble calling it when you're saying this is a policy objective. There's a whole bunch of different policies, and it's more a plan. But anyhow, so I've got to open all my little bullets here. The reason for the policy, under background, I guess it's background, you've said that bed and breakfast is the only STR allowed in the land use bylaw, but we've got commercial guest accommodation in Smith Road. And are you considering commercial guest accommodation a short-term rental?
No, because the short-term rental would be a dwelling, whereas a commercial rental is,
all those cottages in Davy's Orchard are dwellings.
That's the intent, but I'm not sure exactly the semantics.
I just wanted to raise so that people understood there are commercial guest accommodations.
Yes.
Self-contained dwelling units or suites that are being rented out now and quite legally in Smith Code.
The policy is for residential properties.
So basically, if somebody has a residential property and they don't like the 120 days, then they could apply for rezoning for commercial guest accommodation.
Definitely.
Okay.
Is commercial, is that allowed outside of Snow Cove?
Well, that's why they have to apply for rezoning.
I believe there are a couple spots, sorry, I don't have a map with me.
It's okay.
Like Xenia.
Well, Xenia is a retreat center and the.
It's okay, I took you off
The
topic.
vineyard
Never mind.
is a
Yeah.
guest house, yeah.
Yeah, and they have accommodations, not residential. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the exact, there is something about commercial use, but the policy is meant for residential, short-term rental use of residential properties. And if it were to be commercial guest accommodations, it would require rezoning.
Then I guess it's in your business licensing bylaw section, you've got proof of adequate insurance. Can you expand on what is considered adequate insurance? That's business licensing bylaw section, the second page, point 5A.
Yes, so from the review of the comparable municipalities, I do have some numbers. I don't know it off the top of my head, but we would bring back a draft of a good neighbor agreement for council review if the policy is adopted. Yes.
Numbers in it, and are you talking about liability insurance and property insurance, or just one or the other?
I believe it's just liability, but again, I would have to go through the research findings.
Okay. And then, a couple sort of typo type thing. Okay, so let's still try to go down here. So in the definition of bed and breakfast or seasonal rental, I'm having trouble with seasonal rental, because seasonal to me means certain times of the year, where we have a lot of people that come to the island regularly all year to use their property. And they might rent it out in December, or they might rent it out in June. So it's not, it's more part-time than it is seasonal. And then the other is, I guess, the logic of the 120 days. Just because that's the number other communities use, or is there a range that other communities use? How would you say?
They've all been 4 months. Actually, I haven't talked to them, or at least talked to anyone that knew why, but we also feel that 4 months is a reasonable amount of time. Beyond that, then it should really be considered commercial.
So if I'm reading this correctly, the only standalone residential dwellings that can be rented for 30 days or less to somebody are ones that somebody is actually occupying, the owner occupies at some point during the year, not a standalone empty that nobody ever occupies.
There's no restriction on that, at least not one that we're proposing.
So if I had a standalone property, I never use it, I could rent it out for 120 days and it would sit empty for the remainder.
Yes.
It could, yeah. The proposed definition for a seasonal rental only says that it is rented for a period of less than 30 consecutive days, up to 120 days in a year. It does not have to be consecutive. It's not restricted by season.
Okay, so I'm having trouble just, for somebody just going to go and read this, and it's confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so going down and then, the rest are sort of little typo things that I'll relate to you later. Okay, that was my question.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. There's a lot of work reflected in this, and I know the situation is different in different municipalities. So I guess I'll start my comments where Allison started her comments. I really struggle with the definitions here. And when I was trying to figure out how to understand how they fit together, I wasn't aware that you had restricted the scope to residential. I see that now, but I was thinking about the larger context in the municipality where we do have commercial guest accommodation, where we have guest houses, and both of those allow for what an ordinary citizen would consider to be short-term rentals. And similarly with a bed and breakfast, we often end up talking about bed and breakfast as being a short-term rental, although technically within our land use bylaw, they're not. So when I try to figure out how these different pieces fit together, I ended up landing, and I don't know if this is any value, but it's feedback on the policy. I ended up landing on short-term rentals is the overarching category, and it includes bed and breakfasts, guest houses, commercial guest houses, and seasonal rental, or whatever that ends up being called. And from the perspective of understanding that all of those things can be rented out short-term, it made more sense to me logically. And I thought this might actually make more sense to the public. So the restriction to talking about residential scope, I think it might be helpful to include guest houses and commercial guest accommodation, in part because people are going to ask where do they fit in this spectrum, especially if they're looking at exceeding the 120 days and thinking about, well, maybe our option then is to apply for a commercial guest house. And then the distinction with the secondary detached and attached secondary suites, they just get moved right out of the short-term rental category. So there's this clear distinction between stuff that's getting rented out for various periods and may or may not have a full kitchen, depending on which one they are, and the secondary suites, attached and detached, which are really intended under the bylaws to be for rentals, for long-term rentals. So I'd like you to consider that and see if it works down the road. You don't need to respond right away. With adding these are smaller points. With adding the business license number to the advertising, I think that's great and it is typical. However, it's known that people make up their business license number. And that Airbnb doesn't check the business license number. And in some instances, business license numbers have been used multiple times. So I think there's still an issue around confirming the accuracy, and I don't have a solution for that. I'm just flagging it. I think that the seasonal rental label isn't clear. We need something else there, and I don't know what it is.
Part-time, periodic, something.
Something else. Because seasonal does make people think right away, it's 4 months, and then 8 months of the year, the place is going to be empty. And that was not what was intended even with the original here. The 3% tax on the MRDT, earlier on in public comments, someone in public comments said, oh, this would go to Birch and to tourism, Bowen. My understanding is that it would be allocated to our housing fund, our affordable housing fund, rather than directly to Birch. Probably would end up with Birch, but just to clarify that there's not a direct route. And I don't know if there's a direct route to tourism Bowen or whether it's allocated for tourism purposes and then could be dispersed by the municipality to tourism Bowen or to some other organization. That's all for now.
Okay, Simone first then.
Can I just address some
Sure.
of the comments?
Yeah. Please.
As far as the short-term rental umbrella encompassing the commercial options, like the commercial guest house, guest accommodations, and the inn, the business licensing codes those types of operations differently. So I'm not sure, it would take a little bit more research.
Well, I'm assuming that there would be, what do they call it, consequential amendments to the business license bylaw.
Oh, I just meant as in like the industry.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the business license number, correct, we could pay a lot more money for something like host compliance and do the cross-reference to see if the business license numbers they find are in our database. I don't think it's worthwhile for the number of listings we have, but the bylaw does propose the random checks. So we do get a report that we can access at any time, as long as we're subscribing to the service, and it will show all the listings at any given time, along with the business license in a spreadsheet type of format that we could easily cross-reference ourselves, just do a quick search and find.
That's great.
Yeah, so we do plan to do that periodically, at least in the beginning of the implementation, to ensure compliance as far as the business licensing numbers. I also agree with the seasonal label. Staff has discussed it back and forth a bit, so we're open to suggestions.
Great.
So,
Okay, well, mine are similar. I had been thinking already about an umbrella short-term rental. Partly just for the education side, rather than the policy-specific side. So even if it's a brochure or a way that we're communicating it through the business licensing, something that's clearer for people. So you don't have people like me asking that question I did off the top and getting the conversation off of the topic of what this policy is for, which is residential. But I still think an overall concept diagram, if you want to call it that, would be a good, useful thing for everybody, including the neighbors who might be wondering what's going on next door. And my questions, I wonder about the 120 days, 4 months, seems like a long time, and so maybe that leads into, is that right for Bowen? And best practices where? I'm aware of people on Bowen who have been renting and had to move out of their place for the summer, for a few months, things like that. 4 months seems like a really long time for that, and it would make it difficult for people to actually live in the house as a long-term rental for the rest of the year. So it might be something to explore in the Bowen situation. I'm aware that sometimes it's a couple of months, but then long-term rentals move back in. They go somewhere else for the summer. Anyway, an idea. I'm wondering how he came up with the 120 days, or is that just what other municipalities do? And best practices where? Where are these other municipalities? And then my last question is a good neighbor agreement. I know we've got one of those with the Legion, one of those, we've got a few of those. Would this be similar? So 120 days, best practices where, and would the good neighbor policy be similar?
For the 120 days, I can't say off the top of my head, but there are at least 2 municipalities that specify 120 days, which I can definitely share by email later. Okay. And then the good neighbor policy will be drafted. I don't believe it will look all too similar to existing
Could be
ones in
something
the
different.
region.
All right. And then what were these comparative communities that you looked at?
There were 22.
Okay. In BC?
Again, I can, yeah, in PC.
Okay.
So again, I can share the list, the whole table actually.
Was that in the earlier report?
No, it was not.
I'd
It
like
was
to see that.
summarized.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
If you're preparing that list, could you also indicate in which communities the rental of whole houses was prohibited altogether?
Yes.
Because I'm curious.
Yes. I'm just thinking because there's different different ways that different municipalities have prohibited entire houses. Some go by principal residence, some just say no entire dwellings. So I'd have to go through it to make it clear.
So it would be a bunch of work.
I would say too with that is that most of our compared communities are ones that we know of where they've addressed it and they've done a recent program and they have bylaws in place. With others would be like Ronald where we prohibit it. It probably wouldn't have been to our comparative communities. So
No,
there's
that's
not a whole lot to look at. So we wouldn't have.
Ones where they've already been through this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are the ones we've looked at.
Well, I'm satisfied with 22 comparative municipalities in DC. That's fine with me. I don't need to see the table unless you'd like to see the
We're all different, we're all first.
Just on the 3% MRDT, who's collecting that? How do we know it's being collected? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
No, so I've skimmed through the application materials. As mentioned, it's a pretty lengthy and complicated process, so I can't give you all the details. Definitely not with a high degree of confidence, but I do believe that the individual businesses collect the tax and then it comes back to the municipality from the province. But as far as do we get it in our reserve or do we have to designate specific organizations, I don't know that.
But presumably if I'm renting out a place $100 a night, I'm charging $3 of tax and then, okay.
That's very similar to, you probably see a VAT tax.
Plus the 7% provincial sales tax.
Emma, listen, firstly, thank you very much. You've taken a hugely complex subject, a multitude of diverse information, and you tried to percolate, I think you have, into one initial report, so thank you. What I think one of the main achievements is you've enabled, you've shown very clearly some issues which are probably got a huge amount of agreement, are not contentious, and therefore can almost be taken off the table. They can be resolved. Whether we're talking about business licenses, I think we have general agreement. Whether we're talking about I don't know, bed and breakfast, we've got generally. There's a whole plethora of items there that you've shown very clearly that seem to be generally, subject to some tweaking, some rewording, pretty much in agreement. The pivotal points seem to be, firstly, the security around secondary bylaws, and I take the point that Neris Poole made at the opening of our meeting very, very seriously, about the secondary suite having been actually turned into the residence, and the residence now turned into the rental property, short-term rental property on an ongoing basis. I'm almost certain, having read there's some really good letters have been written on this subject, and they've come in very recently. Today, the day before, and honestly, I've really not had a chance to give them the time that they've needed, because they've been thoughtful, well laid out letters. And predictably, they will go around 120 days. I don't know where that number came from, where that fell out of the sky, but that's certainly going to be the biggest area of contentiousness. From a hospitality tourism point of view, it will be argued it makes little or no sense. So we can perhaps focus our attentions more meaningfully, because this is going to be referred. Right? We're not making a decision. This is being referred on the because I think there's a degree of alarm that suddenly people are going to be confronted with this, and I think that's something that needs to be allayed. This is being referred to other groups. And I wonder whether our thoughts could be on the secondary bylaws and on this 120 days. I just see that as the one needing the most work. And frankly, if that's all that needs the most work, thank you very much, because you've done a great deal of wonderful job of shortening the list. So, but I think that's what we're left with, and let's get to it, because there's a lot of people there. And let's have some more time, please, to read those excellent letters. And there's been about, it was half a dozen here.
Well, we can't read them if they don't send them in on.
Well, I know, but they are still very, very detailed and very, very thoughtful, and something that we all need to take into account
Do
before
we
we
need to
move
refer
forward.
those to staff, or staff will?
You've got them. So thank you, Emma. Thank you, Michael. David.
Thanks. My comments are similar to where Michael was. First of all, I support your recommendation to send this out, but we need to try to get a better grasp on some of the things. I mean, the issues, there are two issues, it seems, two main issues. One is trouble in the neighborhood, and I think we're addressing that through the various good neighbor and having a representative on the island and so on. So I think that's good. But the other is, how does this impact long-term rentals? And the 120 days is sort of one of the important mechanisms, but I don't understand, like Michael and others have said, where that comes from. Like, does that help us really understand that? Because we've got letters on both sides of that issue, and they're all good letters. And the other is the one that also Michael and Neris mentioned about the secondary suites and how that all would work. And so both of those issues, I think, impact this whole issue of, does this change the affordability of our community? And so I'd like to know more about that. But I'm supporting moving forward, taking it out to the recommendations and finding more about those two issues particularly.
Yeah, we've got, Allison, you got a quick one there?
Yeah, just a couple. I forgot one. So with a house that has a suite in it, and the suite does have a kitchen combination, and the person's living in the main part of the house, what's wrong with allowing that to be rented out for more than 120 days? Because
You are.
No, you're not.
Just full houses.
No. Well, that's the question, I guess. If I have a suite in the house, how long can I rent that out for?
The suite?
Yeah,
As,
as a full, it's got a full kitchen in it.
well, according to this policy, short-term rentals would not be allowed in secondary suites.
Now, is that in the secondary suite policy, or is that in?
It's in this draft policy.
Okay, so I understood the policy correctly.
Yeah.
you're saying, if I have a secondary suite, I can't rent it out. So it says
For less than 30
days.
days.
So it's gonna sit empty again, 180 days, 300 days of the year until my kids come home to use it at Christmas and Easter and friends and family visit in the summertime. So you're not increasing the rental stock, but it might be a significant revenue generator for somebody who's living on a pension.
Well, or somebody lives in it except for 3 days.
Or, no, somebody's living in the other part of it.
You can still rent it out a long-term rental.
No, they don't want to rent it out on long-term
They use
rental.
it
And
as
I've talked to a lot of people who have a suite in their house, and they was there when they bought the house. And they fixed one up so their kid could live in it, not really bug mom and dad, and when they're making a grilled cheese sandwich at 2 in the morning. And now they've moved out, but they all come back with their families at Christmas time or whatever, or friends and family come to visit, and I can think of lots of those. And I've talked to a lot of those people, and it won't go into the long-term rental stock because of that. Plus, they don't want the risk of having a tenant they don't want.
So I mean,
Well, that's
So that was one question, sort of, you know,
I think the option in that case would be similar to your option now in terms of converting the suite into bed and breakfast units, especially if somebody.
So taking out the
main
stove.
house. Yeah, and so what we've tried to do is give more clarity in exactly what you want to do.
Kitchen.
Currently, we say you
Okay.
can't have a kitchen, which is where you prepare food, but in practice, everyone on the island will tell you it means you have no stove. So we tried to make it a little clearer in terms of what that line is.
Okay. All right, and then the other question was, I think it was Maureen's question, she raised about how do people know fraudulent business licenses. I've been looking at business licenses in some of the other municipalities, and you can actually go on their website and see if an entity has a business license. And we don't have that many businesses that it would be easy to do. And then people could go and, you know, yeah, check the entity. And then my last one was, some communities have gone into agreements with Airbnb, and they will collect the MRDT, the 7% and whatever fees or whatever. So that hasn't been contemplated at all in any of this policy.
Yeah, it does. Wouldn't Airbnb or somebody collect that MRDT?
Yeah, the business.
But you have to enter
responsible.
into agreements with them, I think.
Well,
We don't,
No.
no, it's a
province
provincial,
has.
Province does.
yeah.
Okay. But I thought with some of the others, when we were listening to Tofino talk, there was something else that they were collecting.
That-
Maybe it was a voluntary tax.
Tofino would have been doing
Before
that
that.
prior to the implementation
Oh,
of the
provincial,
tax collection at the provincial level. Yeah, Daniel had a point.
Oh, my point was just that we're working on a prototype of business licenses online, and then we're hoping by November we would have where people can look up online business license.
Okay, thank you.
I just
Okay,
have one more.
quickly. We gotta move on.
Okay, I didn't see anything in here, and maybe because I just skimmed it quickly, that put any limits onto the numbers per neighborhood. I'm just wondering about how we make it so that no one neighborhood gets more than their share of these. Has there been any thought about that?
Yes. This was a difficult one, because we don't want to restrict. It would become a first come, first served
Right.
basis, right? And it would be, with the
Problematic.
number, yeah, with the density that we have on the island, it would be difficult to specify areas and caps by areas.
Right, okay, that's fine, thank you. I just want to make sure I hadn't missed it, and I'm fine to send this out to referral and collect up more public information, and we've got a public meeting, right? And so I'm fine to move on. I just want to make sure I understood the draft.
Okay, yeah, we did look at it, just geographically, it was very difficult to propose something with some sort of basis.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your input. This is very early days on this, obviously. It's gonna go out to the public. There's gonna be a lot of information come back, and then we can sort of have a look at it again and see if we can work this out. Just a few things that came up in your presentation, which was very good, and thanks. Secondary suites, I think everybody's sort of under the impression that secondary suites were designed for long-term rentals, and that's, something we're gonna have to deal with. The good neighbor agreement, I'd like to see parking in there, obviously, noise, And there was something else that you mentioned in there that would go in there. The building inspections, would all these suites be inspected? All these accommodations?
Building inspections?
Yeah.
Or business
So to
licenses
get-
that-
Well, it'd be a business license.
We would look for occupancy. I don't know if we would be doing an inspection of each one annually, but we would be requiring the occupancy permit. I think in terms of, yeah, if it would be inspected annually, I don't know if we would go with that more.
Well, I'm just saying, you want something in somebody's house that doesn't have any egress or something like that. I mean, they have to be legal.
Yeah, so we look for occupancy permit, but
Yeah.
that would go with permit.
The kitchen, you mentioned that in the B&Bs, they can put countertop appliances, well, you can put a dishwasher, plug-in dishwasher, you can put a plug-in oven. I mean, you can have your whole kitchen on the countertop. So I don't know how you want to deal with that definition. I've got a problem with 120 days. You know, the rest of the year isn't much good to anybody, you might as well be renting it out. So, but that's my personal opinion. So that'll come around and we can have a discussion on that, but I think it's a little restricted. Anyway, that's it for me. Anybody else got anything? All right.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
We have to get back into a regular meeting.
Yeah, so we're gonna reconvene the regular council meeting, and then it's over to you, David.
Okay. The council received the draft short-term rental policy and refer the draft policy to the Community Economic Development Committee, Housing Advisory Committee, and Public Open House for comment. And the council directs staff to report back on the results of the referrals and public open house.
Second.
Thank you. And any further discussion? No, that's great. All in favor? Thank you very much, and thank you. Oh, yeah, 310, yeah.
Don't leave.
Yeah, not yet. So we're just gonna pull that out of the consent agenda. Allison had 3.10 there. Which is yours.
Find it.
Pedestrian
Page
network.
86.
I don't have pages. Scroll down the agenda. I'm having, this is 310,
Yes.
the pedestrian network.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm having trouble understanding. It said the project corridor covers approximately 1.5 kilometers of Millen Road from Bone Island Trunk Road to Scarborough Road. But you're not looking at the footpath in that whole area,
Yes.
even though there's quite a decent one already from the RCMP down to the firehouse site?
Yes, it's a review. So we're not looking to rebuild it
Well, if you're not looking to rebuild it, why even look at it?
for an evaluation of recommended improvements.
And just for my geography, when you, Scarborough Road starts at the top of Fenton, where that was Scarborough, not
Yeah.
where the eyes go straight ahead, Deggerstone or left to Legion,
Yeah.
okay. And this is more than $5,000, so did you get comparable quotes? Our purchasing policy?
No, I didn't.
Okay, and the other was, so once we do all this review, the second phase of this quote was gonna run up to almost $25,000. And then you've gotta go for tenders and actually start to build it. So where is the money coming from to build it? Is this coming out of the translate?
So depending on the recommendations that come out of the review, it may exceed $25,000, it may be less than $5,000.
To build the trail?
It depends on the recommendations.
And then they will also get considered, the one that came from the transportation committee, will get considered the guy with the rocks.
Rocks, yes.
Okay.
Yes, so the findings will come back to council for consideration.
Yeah, and there's gonna be quite a bit of disruption around the fire hall and that area, the medical center in the future, maybe. So that's something to take into consideration. I won't be doing too much around there.
They're not going to, she said, but they're gonna review it.
No, I know.
But there won't be any construction, so I'm questioning why it should be reviewed.
Okay, Allison, do you wanna read that recommendation? Huh?
No.
I will. Whereas council has approved $25,000 for improvements to the pedestrian network, that council approved the hiring of Urban Systems to complete the proposed work proposal for pedestrian safety review dated September 18, 2019, in the amount of $6,259 plus GST.
I'll second.
Thank you, second. And any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Opposed?
Yeah, because we
Allison
haven't,
Morris.
we've exceeded the purchasing.
And it passes, no.
Okay, now
Okay.
back to, where are we?
We are on item 6.6, DDP 12.
Yeah, right.
Thank you,
The
Emma.
camera's up. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks,
Jennifer,
Emma.
thank you.
She's got a thought.
I do have one more item on the
Yeah,
agenda.
oh, sorry, where is it?
I don't know the number. What's the number?
Oh, 6.7.
Oh, 6.78.
Do I need to ask her
And
question?
7.1.
Oh, the development variance permit.
Yeah, and active design guidelines.
Oh, I've got a whole ton of questions on the design.
So Jennifer is
Oh, yeah, you're not going.
she only has one item, so maybe.
And then it comes back?
Yeah.
Okay.
You good with that?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm not used to variance.
It's okay.
Mayor, council,
Hello, Jennifer. You're welcome.
okay, so I'm talking about a DVP application at 1791 Francis Walk. It's DVP 12, 2019. Okay, so the location for this project is along the shoreline on our western coast. You can see it there. The property boundaries follow this small peninsula and kind of cut it down at the bottom. And you can see in this picture, there's an existing dwelling here. And this is the property line, this orange line.
The what is orange?
That's the property line.
Property line.
Mhm. The existing building, you can see here, sorry, the picture is dark because the sunlight is funky, but all that we're seeing here, this is all the site. There's a residence there and a garage, and then here's the same view looking at the garage and residence there. Okay, here's a view from the, behind the photographer here would be that ocean. Looking up at the building and then looking out towards the ocean, you can see the slope of the site here from the existing building going down towards the ocean. In terms of adjacencies, it's up on kind of a peak, and down below is the closest neighbor there, and then kind of if you look to the right of that neighbor, if this rock wasn't in the way, down there is a public beach.
Which public beach is that?
King Edward Bay.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so the site itself, as you start to look in more detail, now we've got, the site now is outlined in blue. And this dark gray is the existing building. And the variance application is regarding the setback to the sea. So what you see in this dark red dotted line is the 30-meter setback, which would normally be required. And the existing building does cross over that line and has been brought in as a non-conforming existing use for quite some time. This is from about the 60s. The smaller dotted line here is the 15-meter setback, and that is the requested setback that they're asking for in their variance. So this is the new dwelling proposal. They've cited it such that the center is approximately in the center of the existing building, but it has a different orientation and also a different size. So the proposed building is about 3,800 square feet, and it fills up into the setback that they've requested to the 15-meter point.
So why are you doing the 15-meter setback on this bottom piece since it's not going that far forward?
She's showing.
I'm just showing you
Where
where the
the
15-meter
15
line
meters
is.
Oh, okay, so
Why
where,
isn't there one along this? That's a setback line.
Which one, sorry?
Along the shoreline on the south there.
because it's on point.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, dear. This one.
Yeah, across there.
That's not a shoreline.
Oh, isn't it? Where's the beach?
So all this blue stuff is
Oh,
the
this
water,
isn't the
right?
bay?
And then the beach is
Oh,
down
the beach is
here.
right
Oh,
down
okay,
there,
okay.
okay.
And sorry, this blue
Oh,
is
that's the
actually
field and the
showing the
parking
30
area.
meters off from a
Got it.
creek that's down here.
Okay, thank you.
That's not really relevant to the project. Yeah, so sorry, I can see how that would be confusing. This is land. Yeah, so the only C setbacks are here. I'm not showing the setbacks from the boundary, the property lines, because they're not asking for a variance for that. Okay. So the project also involves removal of some trees, which are shown here in red. So I believe we have about 10 trees to be removed, a small one down here and these here, and they've had an arborist come and do a review. Yes.
Just a question on the trees, is there a no-cut bylaw there?
No.
Okay, so it's just part of the building?
I'm showing it because this is a sensitive ecosystem, and it's with you normally when you're close to the sea, you're looking at the ecosystem sensitivity.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why they had to do the whole tree cutting thing with all the big trees. But anyway, carry on.
Okay, so zooming in now again, so we can see this light pink is the existing, the darker red outline is the proposed building, and the green is the foundation line because they have a cantilever here towards the sea. And you can see again the 15-meter proposed setback variance, the 30-meter existing, and then I'm also showing here the building envelope outlines because they're requesting a new building envelope. The existing is this, what color is that, magenta color, and then they're scooching it also to be in this setback. So that would be the new building envelope, and that's submitted as a part of this, the new building envelope covenant. Okay, here's just to give you a feel of what the building looks like. So we've got all 4 elevations. You can see that this is that cantilevered balcony that looks toward the ocean, and garage entries. And then this is kind of the face that looks in the main direction. And here's the face that looks towards the sea, the balcony. Okay, so landscaping wise, this is significant because they're removing several trees, but then they're also replanting some trees. So here on the left, you see the proposed dwelling on the existing landscaping. And then on the right, you see the proposed trees, which are meant to be between the proposed dwelling and the neighbor, which is here, and also the beach, which is down here. And then these trees are also proposed.
Is there a net loss or a net gain?
We don't have the number of trees set yet. This is more like a conceptual plan. So I couldn't speak to that exactly. I mean, we could count these, but they're not held to that particular number.
Just a curiosity question, we've never seen a vegetation plan before, other than if it was for privacy screening, so is that the reason why we've asked for it? Screening for the beach?
Well, they had the plan, and because it was meant to help with ecological questions, I thought it would support their project, so I said, if you have it, go ahead and submit it. Okay, so in terms of alternatives to granting the variance, these are what 2 alternatives would look like, so you get an idea. On the left would be if we did not provide any variance whatsoever, then upon rebuilding this building, I mean, they could leave the building, I suppose, but if they wanted to build a new dwelling, they would have this dark gray area to build within. This is the building envelope covenant here, and then this would be the setback. So that provides them with 2,900 square feet of buildable area. The version on the right shows if we granted a 20 meter sea setback variance only in the area where the existing building is, so that it's about 20 meters, where the existing building, how far it reaches. So this is kind of in a typical request like this, we might use the existing building's setback as the guide for what variance is granted. So that shows the buildable area there, and that would be 4,900 square feet. In meetings with the applicant, they've made clear that this particular building design does not work with either of these. So in both cases, the alternatives are requiring the applicant to redesign the building to a different configuration. Okay, so there is the recommendation.
So the neighbors are all good? Every letter I saw said.
Well, we haven't done the public notice yet, but we do have 2 letters. Maybe three letters of support, but 1 is from Strata and 2 are from the neighbors.
Okay. And the environmental report.
Yes, and so the environmental report has stated that the area that is outside of the 15 meters is extremely sensitive in this area, but that ecosystem does not exist within this 15 to 30 meter.
Okay. Anyway, due to the amount of work that was done on that, this thing's 84 pages long. It was quite comprehensive. Pay a lot of money for all this work. But I see that everything's in place, and I will see what the neighbors say, but at this point, I'm fine with the 15 years. So,
Is this, well, I guess my general point of view is that we should uphold our bylaws. And I think that a 30-meter setback from the sea is what we should uphold. It's what everybody else upholds, and I object to making one-off changes to the rules for people who would like to do something different. When it's based on our official community plan and our land use bylaws that were developed with lots of public input over the years. And it's not to say I wouldn't be flexible if they work within the existing building setback, because that land has already been damaged. But you know, to think about our coastline and how much people care about the nature and the sensitivity and the beauty of our coastlines as an island, I think we really need to think about that. And I don't like the idea of removing trees. I know we've dealt, in the previous term, we've dealt with another DVP who had a really limited building space and worked to help it work. And even then, trees that I understood wouldn't be lost didn't seem to be there later. And I just I don't find that there's compelling reasons for this variance, and maybe the existing building setback one I could go with if they were on the old envelope, the old building envelope, but it's near a public beach and it'll be visible. I don't know what the new trees are. I'd be surprised if they could replace exactly the old existing ones, and that's my situation. I'm not in favor. We could let it go and let the neighbors.
okay, Rob first.
Yeah, I'm sort of on the same wavelength as Councillor Fast. I mean, I have no problem giving a variance if somebody's working with the property, wants to extend here and a bit there, and is respectful sort of what, I know that area quite well, I swim there quite a bit, and it's actually quite an iconic sort of sitting on top of the hill up there. But then when, 10 tree removals, which are probably fairly big trees, which is going to open it up from the water, I don't know exactly which 10 it is. But I have some concerns about that change. It's not, I'd like to see people working within what they have, and if a balcony needs to reach over and all that, we've made those variances in the past. This is obviously significantly outside of the current building lot that's right there.
So I have a different view. I toured the site with the architects, with the owners, and what they're trying to do, it's an incredible site. It is an iconic site. It's at the end of this fabulous little peninsula. They're designing a house that is very low and that would be barely viewable from the beach below, from the neighbors. So they're deliberately trying to design make it sort of low impact, but also looking very carefully at the land. They've been working, I know that they've been working on this property very carefully to remove all the invasive species and then take them off island to make sure they're dealt with properly. And so they've looked at that land very carefully. The trees, I've looked at all the trees. A bunch of them are and it's very strange, they're pines that have died. It's hard to know why these pines have died, because pines should be the ones that are surviving, but they have. The others, there's a dead tree at the end that needs to be taken down for safety. The others are all trees that are dead or dying and lying on the ground. So that we're not losing any nice big firs or anything like that, and they're going to plant some more trees. So I can tell you that the owners and the architects are really caring about this land and looking at it really carefully to make sure they're protecting the reindeer lichen, for example, and that all of the natural areas are being protected. So it's with great care that this design has been done, and if you really want to, you could have a look at it if you want, I'm sure. But it's an excellent design, and it's really using the land well.
I like that site visit idea.
Dr. Maureen?
I just have some procedural questions. In sitting through this, there's been a mention of a letter from a strata, which nobody else on council has seen. Letters from neighbors, which...
No, it's in the report. It's all in the report.
It's in the report?
Oh, yeah, it's all in the report. There's an arborist report, everything's in there.
Okay, then site visit, please.
I would support us if I say, what I see is what's there now isn't great. And it seems to me, looking at the report, the depth of the report, which is frankly exceptional, that someone is going to take this land and enhance it in a very sympathetic way. So I'm actually really inclined to see what they're doing, because it seems to me what we've got right now, excuse my grammar, isn't too good, and what we might have could be a great improvement. So I'd like to, with an open mind, just to have a look at that and see it, because the depth to which the proponents have gone to is exceptional, and I value that highly, that someone would care that much and go to that much trouble.
And if I can just remind council that when they do make a decision, it's regarding the siting only. It's not the look of the house or the trees being removed.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Gary.
Anybody else? So it sounds like site visit.
Do you want me to read the recommendation?
Sure.
I can, with the site visit, yeah.
Can I add, I think?
Sure, absolutely.
I just want to add that if we look at this one will show up. One of the reasons for the siting of the home where it is the driveway grade, which comes up the hill like this, and then this area here is flat. And then there is a steep section here, which is at about the 20% grade. And so part of the idea of the placement of the home being pushed in this direction is to allow that 20% grade not to become steeper and to maintain this existing turnaround so that a person could come in, park here, turn around, and exit in this direction. If we look at here's the existing garage. The pull in and the pull out is a bit trickier. And so that is one of the other motivating things that I didn't mention earlier. And I can also second what David mentioned, that the trees that are being removed are all approved by the arborist, with the exception of the trees that are just up against the building here.
Which should be removed for fire smart purposes anyhow.
Thank you, Jim. Who is reading?
Well, I was going to read it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that notice be given, the council will be considering the issuance of development variance permit DBP 12-2019 for the variance of the setback from 30 meters to 15 meters for construction of a new house for 1791 Francis Watt, legally described as Lot 6, Block 1, District Lot 1545, Plan BCS 2587, PID 027-294-528 at the October 28, 2019 meeting of council. The council authorized staff to give notice for consideration of issuance of development variance permit DVP 12-2019 in accordance with Section 499 of the Local Government Act to all properties within 100 meters of the legal boundary of 1791 Francis Walk, legally described as Lot 6, Block 1, DL 1545, Plan BCS 2587, PID 027-294-258, and that a site visit for council be scheduled.
Prior to consideration.
Prior to consideration.
All right, I'll second that. Any further discussion? All in favor? Is that unanimous, Allison?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you read it, yeah. Okay, so it is unanimous, thank you. Thanks very much. Emma, I think you're back again, aren't you?
So
this is consideration of DBP 07-2019 for 375 Cardena Drive, also known as Long Island Marina. It is the residential portion facing Cardena Drive. Okay, I'm gonna skip through most of the background. This is the house that has 2 levels. It has 1 dwelling unit on the upper level and 2 suites on the bottom level. 1 suite has been decommissioned, and the remaining suite exceeds the maximum allowed floor area for a secondary suite. Maximum allowed is 90, and the proposed is 117.6. Oh, okay.
That was quick.
As presented in the introduction, staff does feel that the proposal is consistent with the OCP designation for this area, which allows for alternative forms of housing. It is also the subject of an ongoing rezoning application, I believe is going to council right after this, that has a proposed use very consistent with allowing more dwelling units in this house. So staff does recommend that council approves this variance.
All right, thank you, Ellen. And the recommendation is that council issues development variance from DBP 072019 for the variance of maximum floor area for a secondary suite for 375 Cardena Drive, legally described as Lot A, EBP 33316, District Lot 490-5314-7975, PID 029-311-284. Second, thank you. And any discussion on this? Okay.
Is this, I'm familiar with this Cove Point property owners have a covenant, or the municipality has a covenant. I don't know exactly how that works. I just don't see a reference to the covenant in here.
It's for businesses.
Sorry, a covenant for?
I think it's just with the old CNMP property.
Is it?
Yeah.
Only?
Yeah.
Because I knew that there had been interactions between the Smith Point Property Owners Association and the marina over the years, Bowen Island Marina, and I wasn't sure if that was
I heard rumors years ago of old strata covenants.
Like any covenants all have to do with operating businesses. Nothing to do with residential.
Well, I would just request that if there's any covenants registered on the title, that they be investigated.
Yes, staff has reviewed all the covenants on title. There weren't any that would cause concern.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll ask a question. All in favor? Thank you, unanimous. Yeah. I was going to. Emma, how long do you think that design guideline one's going to be? I mean, Daniel, you're sort of.
If we want to get you on a vote.
I would love that.
Is it too late or?
I don't know what the questions are actually.
Okay, well, let's give it a try.
What time do you have to leave to catch your boat down?
I have 15 minutes.
Okay, let's go for it.
No, the boat leaves at 8:50.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be ready, so.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it if you want. Let's give it a try.
It's still in Horseshoe Bay.
I think it's 8:50 still.
Let's go for it.
Just go.
We don't have to look and see when the ferry's leaving.
This is the
Ferry schedule?
Yeah, it leaves going at 8:50.
It's changed.
Here at 8:50.
Well,
That's the end.
It leaves here at 8:50.
Daniel, do you mind checking on your phone?
No, it changes for 2 weeks. It does change.
The only island municipality in DC, right?
The council meeting is run by the ferry schedule. Okay.
they do. Yeah.
You don't have a resignation.
No, I thought it was just
Okay, carrying on, did you have a PowerPoint for this one?
I did not. I thought it was for information, but I think.
Well, it's for referral, right?
Yeah, there is a recommendation, so that was I missed that. Do you want a quick recap? This comes out of the transportation plan implementation for 2019, and it is one of the priority projects meant to be a set of guidelines for developers. So this is for new development to make sure that it addresses the main objectives of the transportation plan to improve the connections across the island, offer up more choices, especially more active choices like walking and cycling, and improve the health of the community by promoting active living. So the document is meant to be very user-friendly. It's targeted for developers, but we also want it to be educational piece for the general public. So it's very graphic oriented, and it's broken down into 3 main stages of development, from the planning stage, subdivisions and rezonings, to subdivision, where we actually get legal lot lines on the ground and showing where road dedications could go and trails could go. And then the building site stage, where we have a lot of good examples, guidelines for how to incorporate more active living elements into your building site. So I hope everyone's had a chance to look at them, because I didn't prepare a presentation, but it does have a lot of good graphics. And this was actually mostly prepared by a planning student from UBC. And she did an excellent job. She went around the island and took pictures on Bowen to give more local context. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but that is the intent of the guidelines, and we would really like to get them out in advance of some of the larger developments that we expect to come online, like Grafton Lakes and bigger subdivisions. So yeah, that's the guidelines.
Just quickly, I just have one question about it. It's really quite an amazing document, and I was kind of misled in how I was looking at it, because I thought it was going to be residential also, but there's a checklist at the end, sort of, and so for developers, I guess, and you know, so they sort of fill that out. What is the onus of that checklist? Like, what if you just don't? If you say, well, no, I didn't look at any of that.
Oh, like if someone went and said XXX, not looking at any of this?
Okay. Not interested yet.
Well, do they even have to fill it out once they're at the building permit stage?
We encourage them to.
Okay.
I think we have a little bit more leverage during the planning stages. And I think really it's more at the subdivision, and I mean subdivision we do have in our subdivision development servicing bylaw that proposed subdivision layouts should be consistent with our transportation plan. We have proposed cycling networks and pedestrian networks, and then we have a multi-use path proposed trail. So having that checklist kind of helps draw attention to some of the different elements that are proposed in the plan, but it also helps like our approving officer when they're reviewing a plan to keep, you know, at top of mind, what are we looking for, and we also want to keep it flexible. I think that's the point of the guidelines, is not a very prescriptive, like you have to do A, B, and C. It's like, these are the intent, this is the intent of these guidelines. If you can't do A, B, and C, that's okay. If you can show that you've thought about this and you're addressing the intent, I think we're hoping that it helps developers, but also municipal staff when we're reviewing different developments, and council as well, looking at discretionary approvals. Like what is the intent that we're trying to, what kind of community are we trying to build, like what kind of built environment, and they're good guidelines to give those guiding principles when we're reviewing different development proposals.
I think there are, and the chief part to me is that they are guidelines.
Yes.
And especially when you get into the building and the entrances and that sort of thing, and talk about accessibility, which is lovely, but sometimes it might not work and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It could be a very expensive change.
Yeah, and I think right in the beginning section is like how to use this guide. There's like a caveat section, like, you know, we understand every site and every development project is different and might not be applicable. We also wanted to get it out to the greater community, so they create the demand for this type of development.
Absolutely, absolutely, no, it's fabulous.
I had a couple of questions.
A lot of questions. Let's take one first.
Okay, so I think you've maybe left out a couple of, like, who's the guide for? You've got the developer, the municipal planner, and the community member. What about the people that are providing the services, like Canada Post with their mailboxes, so you can actually walk to them? And And you've talked about third places, active transportation network should connect with third places. Well, we're looking to build a community center, so I was really kind of surprised that library was mentioned, but not the community center. And also I'm thinking, because you're talking about parks and active recreation, that it should be referred to the Recreation and Community Services Committee. And do we allow shared driveways in our land use bylaw and our street access bylaw? Okay, don't see that. And I was confused about the comment about avoid placing the parking area in the front of the property. We don't have lanes, and most of our houses aren't on corners, so where else are they gonna go?
There's different ways to design it.
Well, you've got a street, it's your only access. You've got a house. It's gonna have to go in front, unless you've got a big enough lot to put it on the side.
Yeah, it depends on the site and it depends on the design.
Just saying it's preferable to keep it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's the thing, it says try, it says avoid, rather than saying try to avoid. It's, for guidelines, it's sounding too prescriptive in the tone of the language. And that's sort of, I guess, what sort of got me going. It almost made me think it was a little too citified.
Is that it, Allison?
Yeah, that was,
Thank
it's
you.
out for referral, so
I
we
know
can
that
ask
was, so.
Parks and, or the Recreation Commission.
Maureen?
One of your principal audiences is developers. Have you shared it with anyone at this point to see if it's understood and useful to them?
Building community, yeah.
I mean, when you produce something like that, you do a certain amount of user testing. You know, is it clear? So,
No, we haven't.
you haven't. I think that would be important to do.
Good idea.
And just leave it as a draft until you get that feedback.
You might get some of that from the advisory design panel, but I don't know.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, but it's a way of getting buy-in as well. You know,
Yeah.
that they see it, they have an opportunity
It
to
looks so
comment.
finished.
And they also would point out things that were like not possible,
Yeah, true.
which would be helpful.
So the recommendation is that council receive the draft active design guidelines and refer the draft guidelines to the Parks, Trails, and Greenways Advisory Committee, the Advisory Design Panel, the Advisory Design, the ABC, the Advisory Planning Commission, and the Environment and Climate Action Advisory Committee for comment prior.
And the community recreation.
Recreation Community Services Commission.
Oh, okay, so you're reading it out there. I missed
No,
that
he-
part.
she
No,
added
did
that.
Yeah, added that,
Yeah.
okay. To council, prior to council consideration of approval of the guidelines. Did you get that extra part in there? Thanks. Okay,
Second.
thank you. Further questions? No, all in favor? All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks. Okay, Daniel, back to you. Or it's 6.7B.
Right in here.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. So this is part 2 of our 375 Cardena Drive, Long Island Marina applications. So Emma's gone over, this is located at the Long Island Marina. So I have a picture here, this is an older picture showing the former business here, but showing these 3 retail spaces along the pier at Long Island Marina. And then one of more recent photos showing the recent seating area outside of one of the retail units. So this property, as Emma went over, is a split zone property, so it has a section within the VC2B zone and a section within the SR2, the residential zone, and the applications for changes within both of those zones. So I'm looking first at the SR2 zoning. So SR2 allows accessory residential use, which says you can have not more than one accessory residential use, which is a secondary suite or a detached secondary suite permitted on a lot. And so this building, so this part of it was covered by the variance permit that you just permitted, and the rezoning application is to reinstall the suite, the second suite within the basement. I should go just as way of introduction for this whole application, I guess, is that the property was recently bought, I think a year ago, by a new owner. And in doing renovations and in doing works, business licensing of businesses on the pier, they've encountered that several of the things existing on the property were not in compliance with our bylaws and were done without permits. So this was one of the examples, was the 2 suites existing in the house at the time of purchase. And when they started to renovate, they were informed that that was not permitted in our zoning, so they incorporated it into a rezoning application. And same with changes to the BC2B, the commercial component, again, is changes that have been put in place, and the new owner is looking for ways to bring that into compliance through a rezoning. So then the second part, the BC2B, that village commercial, governing the uses on the wharf itself. Apologies, this is small, but so the zoning allows what's called land-based marina facilities, and this definition that means, it lists a number of things that it can be, including takeout food. So currently 2 of the facilities there are takeout food establishments, as well as the zone is a little different in that it allows buildings and structures limited to 1 gazebo, and those buildings and structures located within the BC2B zone and approved for construction by development permits in 89 and in 95. So those are the only buildings and structures that are permitted in that area, kind of highlighted there. And so this is on the map that's in that 95 development permit. So I've got a little closer because we see the 2 different storage sheds and this third one that Bowen Island Kayak uses. So what the rezoning is for one is to allow an additional secondary suite within the SR2 zone, so that's within the house, to reinstall that secondary suite. So one is, and the second one is then to amend the land-based marina facilities to permit seating within food establishments. So the 2 establishments that are takeout establishments both have seating either within or immediately sort of adjacent to and associated with. And so it would be amend the zoning to allow that in some form. And the third one then is to amend the zone variation to permit additional buildings. So when you look at these 2 storage sheds, since there's been an addition out the side of this one to build a staff bathroom, and then the 2 buildings have been joined to make a 3rd retail space in the middle. So the zoning would be to allow those additional buildings. Now I flagged this one as sort of what we call an infill building, subject to building code considerations. So our building inspector has concerns with how that was done. And the upgrades that would be necessary to make it. So it may be that even if the zoning went ahead and said, okay, you can do it subject to a building permit, that doesn't actually remain, or the work to do it would be so significant that it doesn't remain. And so what the recommendation is today is to refer it to 3 different committees in advance of coming back with an amendment bylaw for council's consideration.
So we're just talking B now, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to read that?
Yeah.
Okay. So that council for application RZ02 2019 to the Advisory Planning Commission, the Housing Advisory Commission, and the Community Economic Development Committee. And the council directs staff to prepare a bylaw to amend the land use bylaw to allow for the development proposal presented by Jonathan Grimball, outlined in September 30, 2019 meeting. Move that.
I do have a question.
Yes, absolutely.
In allowing the secondary suite in SR2, is that going to be specifically for this lot, or will it be for SR2?
It would be specifically for this lot, is what, yeah, so I haven't drafted the bylaw, but what's envisioned as part of this application would be for this lot in particular. Yes.
So it would be a specific exclusion.
Yeah, it would be SR2, whatever we're up to.
D log or something, yeah.
And it would be the only building that then had 2 secondary suites that were legit on the island.
Yeah.
So there's a precedent here. Okay, thank you.
So,
My question is, when did this go to the neighbors and the public and that kind of thing? Because I'm assuming with the rezoning, there's a public process.
Yep, so we would be looking to hold then open house after first reading, would be what we propose. And so notice would go out as part of that, and then notice would go out, the formal notice for a public hearing would go out after second reading, is when they would again be notified about public hearing.
Okay, so there's quite a ways to go or not.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, just for.
Given the
everybody's clarity.
location of this, would you do the open house there?
I would think that would make sense. Yeah, I'm thinking depending on timing, if it's, you know, a February evening, maybe it doesn't work, but,
Well, they have the 10th.
yeah, but yes.
Any further discussion? So,
I'm concerned about that in-between building, because I think, as I recall, the original, the earlier rezoning, there were for those two separate individual things to give it the cottagey feel and that kind of thing, but now it's got that
gift shop.
shopping mall kind of strict look, and, but I guess this rezoning will help clarify what would be permitted, okay.
All right, I'll ask a question, all in favor? Okay, I think that's got it all. Allison? Yeah. Thank you, okay. Thank you, and I think we're down to Owen.
3.2. This is your first time in front of us like this.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome.
Will be nice.
Thank you. All right, well, I don't have an exciting presentation, I'm sorry. So I'm just going to talk to you, and I know you've had lots of that, so I'll try and be quick. For those of you that don't know me, obviously I am Helen. I am the new Community Economic Development Officer, or CEDO, as you will see bandied about. I was hired in June this year to complete the Community Economic Development Plan. Again, it will be referred to as the CED plan, because otherwise everything gets really long. So the Community Economic Development Plan is a 2-year program, and it runs from obviously June this year when I was hired to June 2021. And it's being paid for by the 5th intake of the BC Rural Dividend Programme, which we applied for in July 2018. We've also put some money towards it ourselves. We put $13,000 from the municipal's money, which will go in that's subject to our 2020 budget approval, which hopefully we'll say we're gonna approve. And we've also put a $12,000 in kind for administrative support, and that's throughout the life of the program, so it's split across the 2 years. The purpose of the CD plan is this is all in the report, by the way, just so you know, it's to meet our OCP commitment number 409 to complete a community economic development plan, and that's going to examine our long and short-term issues, needs and opportunities to enhance existing and new businesses and associated employment that's complementary to the objectives of this OCP. It's also to advance our community's ambition to be a sustainable island municipality within the Islands Trust. So the key components of the plan, obviously I'm going to do extensive research. We'll be doing lots of community engagement, because that's the key part of community. Planning and development to identify how our economic strengths, weaknesses, threats and opportunities can be used to help our small island economy continue to thrive and grow in a sustainable, diverse and inclusive way as per our OCP objectives. So the overall phasing, if you guys just look at page 2 of the report there, you'll see what I'm about to chat you through. I'm going to try and be brief here, but this was the overall phasing that was outlined in the grant application that was approved. So obviously phase 1 was the review and research phase, and that was June this year through to January 2020. Obviously, first of all, they had to hire me, or not necessarily me, just a community economic development officer, but it happened to be me, so I'm thrilled about that. And then we had to prepare the phase 1 work plan, which is what you guys have got in front of you just now. I'm now in the review and assess phase, so I'm looking at the work that's been completed to date on Bourne Island, so that involves sort of bylaws, policies, reports, documents, that kind of stuff that we've done. And then also looking at our comparative communities. We've had a chat about that already today. We've got quite a few of those, about 22 in total. And other selected communities in BC that are kind of local. After that, I'll be obviously summarising all of the research findings into a big report that you guys will see. And then I'll be preparing the phase 2 work plan for approval. The first interim report, just so that you can see it there, has been done and sent off, and the government have approved it. You'll be thrilled to know, so that's great. After all that's been done, we move on to phase 2, which is community engagement. I've got to tell you, I'm pretty excited about that actually. So that's from January next year through till July. And quite a bit of that's going to be done hand in hand with the Economic Development Committee as well, because I'm only one person and I can't do all that by myself. So I started to chat about them, with them about that. So obviously, first of all, we've got to talk to people about what we're going to be doing, because obviously a lot of the community won't even know what CED is, so we need to tell people about what it is, first of all. And then we can get to starting to consult with them about, you know, what we want to do, what their priorities are, and that will help us to inform the CED plan. So that's what a lot of that will be. And we've got to look at our target sectors in terms of businesses, community groups, residents, all those different things. So they're the different parts of the engagement. We'll be holding things like visioning workshops and open houses. We're looking at doing some mentoring activities as well for our seniors and youth to make sure that we engage with them, because they're a key part of our community. And then also we've got to submit another interim report to the rural dividends, because we've got to keep them abreast of how we're spending their money. And then at the end of all of that, I have to prepare my next phased work plan for you guys, so that you know what I'm doing next. So we've got quite a lot going on in phase 2, but it's going to be really exciting, and hopefully the community is going to get excited about what we're proposing to do. So after that, and you've seen what I'm planning for phase 3, will be in August. And so it runs from August till June 2021. It's quite a long stretch, because that's when I have to actually write the plan with all of the information that I've been gathering. So that stage, we will actually be able to look at some of the business licensing data that we've been gathering. We'll be at a point there we'll actually have had it in for a while, so we'll actually be able to start to look at some of the information that we've got in place. I've had a chat to Tess already and said, heads up, we're going to be asking you for this information here, so she knows. So then I actually get to start to draft the economic development plan, which I'm very excited about. And I got to use all the information that we've been gathering over that length of time. Once it's drafted, obviously you guys get to see it, and so do the community, and everybody gets to give me a load of feedback, which hopefully is nice, but I don't mind if it isn't. It just needs to be useful, because then we use that feedback to, you know, finalise it and to make it into something that's really actionable and awesome for the community. While that's going on, I have yet another report to send to the government to say we're spending your money wisely. So that all goes on, and then once obviously I've got all of the feedback gathered, I get to finalise the CED plan. And within that, we obviously develop a load of policies and procedures. They get outlined, and there will also be partnerships identified with key stakeholders, so all of those will get pulled out and brought into adoption too. And then hopefully everything will get pulled together and it'll get presented back, and you guys will say, this is amazing, thank you very much, we will adopt it. I'm hoping that's how that's going to go. And then I just consolidate everything at that point, and we'll have a brilliant document that we can take forward, and we've got something that we can use that's going to really help the island, you know, thrive. So that was a very fast run through of what's going to be the next 2 years of work for me. And obviously, as the phases of the work plans get, you know, written out, there's way more detail, as you can see from that behemoth document that you've got. So just for phase 1, as I mentioned, we're currently in that phase. So just give you a broad view of what that is, so that you don't have to try and read that. The research phase basically consists of a thorough review, as I mentioned, of past and present community economic development work to date on Bowen Island. So that's like plans, policies, documents, bylaws, all that kind of stuff that we've done. And we've done quite a bit actually, which is amazing for such a small island community. And then I cross-reference all of that with in-depth research into CED initiatives in our comparative communities. And other selected BC communities. Now, something I should probably note is that although we've identified quite a number of comparative communities, they haven't all actually got CED stuff happening. And so as I started to do the research, I pulled out the ones that have. And I'll talk about those in a sec, but you know, I've only actually been able to use a small number of them because they haven't all got stuff going on. And so that's why I then went a bit wider and did some in wider BC, because it just gives me a bit more to go on. So, and then obviously I'm going to be contacting key stakeholders that we've got. I've mentioned that in the work plan, and then you know, using their knowledge as well, because we've got such a wealth of knowledge here. So I'm going to be using that. And obviously when I present my findings report and the CED plan, there'll be a full list of, you know, everything that I've looked at, so you guys will know. Because that plan is quite dense that you're looking at, I'll just let you know what I've already done today. So I've started my interviews with my stakeholders. I've got more scheduled. I've completed the review of the large-scale Bowen Island documents, so that's the Island Plan 2019, the OCP consolidated version from December 2014, and the land use bylaws. So I've been pulling out things that are relevant and useful and might be you know, good for us to sort of either tweak or change, or you know, things that people are already sort of looking at right now, and how we can all mesh together. I'm underway with the smaller scale Bowen Island documents. You'll see the list that's in the work plan there, and the same with the other documents that I pulled out there. In terms of the available comparator and BC communities that I mentioned, so the comparator ones that actually have economic development stuff going on, it's Ucluelet, Lanceville, Sparwood and Gibsons. They're the only people at the moment that have got actual plans and, you know, action plans and things. So for other BC people, it's Hope, Squamish, Lillooet, Regional District, Merrick, Columbia Basin and Squamish. So I've got quite a few, but they're the key people that I'm going to be looking at, and they've got really good stuff, so I think that'll be great for us. As I mentioned, the interim report's gone in, it's been accepted, so that's awesome. I did successfully apply for the SFU course, thank goodness. I start next week, so that's super exciting. I go to the Community Economic Development Committee meetings regularly, and we're in regular contact, so that's really great and really helpful, and they're super excited about everything in general to do with community economic development, so that's really great for me and very exciting. We've started the work on the social media and communication strategy with Sophie, so she's given me a great outline of how to start with that. And obviously we've done lots of those in general in the municipal, so we'll be looking at some of those from previous successes as a basis. And I've started to identify some of the sub-projects as well, and that will just be ongoing throughout the plan. I'm sure there'll be lots that come up. So next, I get to obviously finish my research, and then I write the findings report which you guys will get to see, and we prepare the phase 2 work plan. And then finally, we'll start to prepare for the community engagement, and that includes the social media strategy. So that's basically what I've been doing, what I'm going to do, and what you guys will get to see. So that was an extremely fast rundown. Thank you for bearing with me there.
Well done, that was exhausting.
So,
Very
I know, I was like,
exciting, very exciting.
So has anybody got anything they'd like to ask me?
You're going to do this all in 2 years.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm basically just planning on not sleeping. That's it.
Sleep's overrated.
It's overrated, yeah.
Anybody else?
Just that I'm glad to see you're going to be working with the Rural Islands Economic Forum. Are you
Mhm.
going to that as well?
I am going, yes.
Good.
Yes, I'm very excited. I had a chat with them on Thursday last week, actually, because I'm on one of the panels. So,
Oh, good.
that's,
So you'd be all involved.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so the recommendation is that council approve the Community Economic Development Phase 1 work plan as attached to the report from the Community Economic Development Officer, presented at the September 30th, 2019 regular council meeting. Rob, on 2. Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Well done. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks.
Well done.
Okay, bylaws. There you go. Add up.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. I have another rezoning application, and this one is an application to amend the land use bylaw as well as the official community plan. So this is a property at 720 Gardner Lane. It's located about in the middle of the island. Some way of background. The applicant's applying operated a bed and breakfast and yoga home business in the Millie's Landing region of Bowen Island, and then recently purchased this property and moved their business to a larger location. They've since built a house on the property, and they've built the guest bedrooms that are allowed under the bed and breakfast zoning. And so we're looking for a way to expand their business. So in the OCP, it's designated as a rural residential lot in this RS designation. And in the land use bylaw, it's split zone, so it's zoned a combination of RR2 in this bottom sort of pie shape, with the remainder of the property being an RR3. And so that's our standard rural residential zoning, allowed dwelling, and a number of other uses. So the proposal is that the RR2 portion be rezoned to rural commercial to retreat center, so for retreat center use. So retreat center use is, this is our land use bylaw definition, provides for spiritual, cultural, education, indoor-outdoor programs. It may include sleeping accommodation for a maximum of 40 in-residence guests in a single building or cabins, as well as a residence for manager or owner of the retreat center. And the RC2 zone then further regulates a maximum of 20 guest bedrooms and 40 in-residence guests as part of the zoning. And the application proposes leaving the RR3 zone on the western portion of the lot unchanged. So that zoning would permit future subdivision to create 2 lots zoned RR3, and that's under the current zone. And the report, so as consideration, so this is our Schedule E of the OCP that shows current and future trails and parks. So one of the things flagged through our review is that the property has a desired trail route running along this border, as well as just on the neighboring property along this border. The application had proposed a trail dedication along this border as well to gain access through to the neighboring property. But so we flagged, okay, it's actually shown for both sides potentially for trails, as well as there's a current municipal park that runs along Bowen Brook. So this is essentially the creek buffer there, and the possibility to extend that park along Bowen Brook. And as part of this proposal, it would mean then giving some sort of easement access across the park land to maintain the current access, but looking at ways of protecting the riparian area as part of the rezoning. And the applicant is open to exploring those options. So then what we're doing today is to introduce it to council and seeking council referral to 3 of our advisory committees, and to direct staff to prepare the amendment bylaws.
All right, Daniel, this is considerable upzoning, I think.
Okay.
And there was a reference in here somewhere about the fact that he's only doing half the property, so he could actually subdivide the rest of the property, dispose of it, or whatever, which is considerable upzoning again.
Right, so it wouldn't be changing the existing zoning on the back portion.
You would be.
Would not be.
Oh, you would. So you have to go through the process.
Yeah, would remain this remainder. The application is, the remainder would,
So
would
how
stay
big
as RR3.
is the piece of property?
It's in the report, and I believe it's 20 acres.
It is absolutely.
And how many lots do you put on that with RR2?
3, so 1 RR2 and 2 in the RR3.
So there wouldn't need to be a rezoning to put the other 2 lots in?
No.
Where is the house that's currently built?
It is right about here.
And we get at this through Harding Road?
So you get through Gardner Lane.
Trunk Road and...
Yeah, so where the road, where you do the S end, past the Meadowbrook corner on this side, so we went right.
Could I see the
Oh,
line?
it's Sacred Sabbath
Yes.
all the time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, which
See
one?
the line drawing?
I didn't realize it was
Yes,
about
what I was
this.
saying,
This one?
No, that's another one. So, let me just make sure I understand this. So the access to this lot is currently off of Grafton Road?
Correct,
Yeah. So you access here. It also has legal access off of Buchanan. So when you come up to the top of Buchanan, there's actually Buchanan as a road allowance continues all the way up this strip as like a half-size strip, and so all borders on that side as well. But there is legal access as well as practical access off Gardner Lane this way.
and the property line is
this. So it doesn't border directly with Eddie's property. There's a road allowance that runs in between.
But they could access the other two lots from that road.
Those little blue things are wetlands?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think they're ponds. But
Oh, are they? Okay.
and that's
Quite a bit of repairing in there, isn't there?
yeah, and so there is an environmental report that's part of the report.
Okay. And it looks all right?
Yeah, so I mean, so the development that took place of building the new dwelling as well as the guest cabins was done under that development permit as well, so under development permit, so making sure it's the right distance from the permit.
I'm just wondering if it should also go to bin tag, like that's like you said, up to 40 residents or something like that?
No, sir. Yeah, oh,
Guest house.
yes, so yeah, it could be 40 guests.
40 guests, 20 units.
I mean, because that could be generating quite a bit of traffic going into that area, and I'm just wondering if
Well, it's a main road. There's nobody else on the other end of that road.
So, does this, if the zoning went through, does that give them the ability to put in 20 cabins? Or a building, you know?
Yeah, so it could be, I guess, looking at it. I mean, I would have to look then. I don't know offhand that like the zoning, the lot coverage and the total number of buildings, but in theory, it's 20 guest bedrooms.
So they haven't given you a concept of what would be built?
There is a concept that doesn't go up to 20. Like currently, I think they're allowed they're allowed 5 guest bedrooms currently under the zoning, and I think they've got sort of 10 maybe proposed. As a bed and breakfast, yeah. Because they're larger than 5.
And is there any amenities proposed?
So as part of the application, the initial application was for the trail easement along the side, and then through our back and forth with our initial review, we're finding out the parkland dedication as well along Bowen Brook, and potentially for the two trail dedications. And I also mentioned in the report, part of the rationale for referring to the APC is, the APC is doing work on conservation development, and even in particular the R3 portion in terms of it's currently zoned for, to say that would be 2 5-acre lots. And then instead it's for the APC to look at and say, okay, what would conservation development look like? And I have spoken to the applicant about that idea that that's something that council is looking for, and they're open for it. So like the focus of their rezoning is for the retreat center purpose, and knowing that the remainder of it could be 2 lots in the future. But they're open to exploring, okay, what that would look like.
Yeah, I guess it was the comment on that next slide that you had. It was just that the application proposed leaving the everything on the western portion of the one unchanged, which would permit perhaps future subdivision, create 2 lots.
Yeah.
the potential of cabins, standalone cabins for a maximum of 40 guests. 40 cabins?
20.
So it'd be 20
cabins? That's a lot of cabins.
A lot of cabins. It's like union teachers.
So this poll's getting me punchy. How many acres would all those cabins be on?
I think it's 4 hectares, so it's 10 acres is the R2 portion.
Yeah, that's pretty adequate. Because the cabins are only going to be, are they going to be legal cabins, or are they going to be 10 by 10?
So, I mean, the existing ones are only legal with building permits.
Sorry?
Yeah,
No,
all
but
the
if they're
building
10 by
permits.
10, though they can have washrooms in there, they don't have building permits.
No. Well, I'm just wondering what kind of cabins are going to be developed. Anyway, let's just, it's got a long way to go here, so let's see what the rest of the agencies have to say.
Will this get referred to staff for access? I mean, it's a pretty steep road, and it's pretty up in the middle of the bush from a fire perspective, so will it get referred to the fire department too?
Yeah, it has been referred to the fire department initially.
Oh, well, this hasn't had any initial referrals, has it?
So we've done the internal referrals to
Oh,
the departments, yeah.
All right, so we want to read the recommendation. Do you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say actually what Diane said. Interestingly, the subcommittee of the APC is working on a conservation development policy. We're meeting with Daniel tomorrow to finalize the work that we've done. So
Okay.
I think this sort of fits nicely within that framework that we discussed, so.
Okay, go ahead, Swan.
That council prefer application RZ 03219 and OCP 02219 to the Advisory Planning Commission, Community and Economic Development Committee, and the Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Committee, and that council direct staff to prepare a bylaw to amend the land use bylaw and the official community plan to allow for the development proposal presented by Satjeep Panhir and Andrew Clark, outlined in the September 30th, 2019 meeting.
I'll second that. And further discussion? All in favor? Thank you, that's unanimous. All right, so we'll move on to Daniel Martin. Update,
Building
update
bylaw.
report on building bylaw.
Okay. I don't have a presentation for this
Okay.
one. It's too hard. But this is the building bylaw we discussed at the last meeting. So we're back to the consideration of third reading to both the building bylaw and the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw. So we are proposing 3 minor amendments to the building bylaw. 2 of which I would say are sort of are clarification. The third one is in terms of permit length and permit extension, is to add an additional period. So originally when you considered first reading and then second reading of the bylaw, it said you would have a 2-year term and you could extend it once for 12 months. So after talking to the building inspector and various contractors, we said, okay, we'll put a second extension within that. So you can ask for a 12-month period and you can ask for an additional 12-month period. So it's not an outright, but it's you can show, okay, this is why I couldn't get it done in time. And we thought that seemed fair. Other than that, I think we received one letter that Mayor and Council received as well that was about crawl spaces within the building bylaw. And so I've replied to that letter writer, but that's something that we can't govern within a building bylaw in terms of crawl spaces, that term in the BC building code, and we can't regulate that, but we can through a land use bylaw change. So it's more about our floor area definition in the land use bylaw rather than a building bylaw specific thing.
So how big is the crawl space of the provincial building bylaw?
6'6".
Well, I think there's like different rooms have a different minimum height. So if you're building like a bathroom, it says, okay, this percentage of it has to be above this thing, and there's sort of a livable height of rooms.
But you can't limit the crawl space underneath.
No, like people got taller crawl spaces, but where we would come into it is we would say that counts as floor area. So if you're worried about your floor area in your building, say, well, we're counting that, that's going to count as part. So people aren't going to want tall crawl spaces. It doesn't make it usually get less than is livable.
Oh, okay, so we could amend the land use bylaw to say any crawl space with more than a certain height is counted in floor area.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, so we do now in terms of it's 2.0 meters, so it's 6'6", so people live 6'6". Yeah. And since then, so this past week since the report's been written, I've had questions from people about how we define simple and complex buildings and how we require code compliance reports. And one other question I can't remember offhand, but more I think questions from people. Oh, and people saying we need to make sure we have adequate material in terms of people who look at it and we send it out and say, what do you think? And they go, this is really long and very legal and complex. And really, if you adopt it, please have a simple manual that we can understand, or like something really straightforward.
Cold zones.
Yeah, so that was really the messaging we've gotten from people, is that they need something simple.
So on the timing of the new bylaw requirements,
Yeah.
we're not meeting on October the 9th, are we? I think it's October.
No, it's
the
October
15th.
15th, isn't it?
Yeah, and the other was you said current active building permits would continue to be governed. What's the definition of an active building permit? They've started construction, or just one has been taken out?
Yeah, so they have it active, I guess, so it hasn't been closed by us.
Okay, so as long as they've taken it out,
Yeah.
even though they've done no work.
Yeah, although then they run the risk of us saying, well, now you're expired under the old building bylaw. It expires after a certain time, and we can say, okay, now you've expired it, and now you
Yeah,
gotta reapply.
but they've got a year to, under
Yeah.
the old bylaw
Yeah.
to start work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Somebody want to read that? No?
I will. The bylaw number 489, 2019, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Building Bylaw number 489, 2019, be read a third time as amended. and that bylaw 491/2019 cited as Bowen Island Municipality Bylaw Notice Enforcement Bylaw number 196/2008, amendment bylaw number 491/2019 be read a third time.
Second, Sue Ellen, and further discussion, all in favor? Thank you, it's unanimous. Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah. All right, so reports of committees, commissions, for there,
Yeah.
and Sue Ellen.
Yeah, well, just to,
Parks, Trails, and
Parks, Trails, and Greenways Advisory Committee, we met.
thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. June 4th, and then there was a walkabout in the middle somewhere there where we visited the site, and then they met again September 17th, where I wasn't with them, but they, because that was just last week, wasn't it? Anyway, no, I wasn't there. But the recommendation did come forward, as in June, that council directs staff to report back on options for, anyway, you can read it. The point is, there was an existing right-of-way to the sea, a little beach, Ecclestone Beach, and I can show you here, it's on Miller's Landing.
You're talking about an unbuilt road allowance?
An unbuilt road allowance that had been
Well, it's
used.
different from a right-of-way, so that's why.
It's a public road.
Yeah, it's an unbuilt
Beside
road
Fitch's
allowance.
old place in there.
Yeah, that's
But
right,
it's a
same
road
one.
allowance.
Same one. So that one, it's been closed. Basically, the neighbor got permission to put, from the Flinmore, to put some big construction thing down there. And it's, Fitch's house has changed hands, and now it's back as a possibility where, oh jeez, I brought out that page. Okay, sorry. Wrong one. That's one of the pages. The point is, there's some interest from the landowner in perhaps allowing a trail designation again so that that could be reopened. There's people in the neighborhood have used it for years. They're the ones who asked for the walkabout. And so we will just, the recommendation is that council directs staff to report back on options for restoring the public coastal access point at the end of Ecclestone Road, a statutory right-of-way, including the possibility of an easement across the neighboring property.
It's a lot of work. And what happens down at the bottom there, because, we spent a lot of time on that property, and as far as I can see, the only way you're gonna get any access to the water without taking down some of the structures is to go way out to the right-hand side, in front of what it was Fitch's house.
And there is a possibility of the new landholder allowing that, some kind of
Oh,
arrangement.
correct.
Fitch sold it.
Yes, I know that. So that would have to be the first avenue to explore.
This would be for staff to explore, and
Yeah, they could report back with options.
Yeah?
Yeah, well, that's what it says, report back on options. So I guess the question is how much staff time and how much is this gonna cost to explore options?
well, our official community plan and our new parks plan direct the community to open and maintain as open access to the sea for the neighborhoods. And Miller's Landing has a number of these that are blocked or that are buffalo jumps, very steep. And this one had been in use until a couple of years ago. Things happened, and now there's an opportunity to reopen it, and we think that it's worthwhile.
So we'd be looking at a statutory right-of-way because, and all the intended survey costs and including the park, but would all that be covered off in the option?
There's been a lot of work done on it already. Previous council has done a walkabout down there. Was it, or was it us?
No, I just think my question is, we'd be looking at a statutory right-of-way because for public access across private property.
Well, if we did in fact go across his property.
Yeah, or are they gonna compare, so my question was more, how much is it gonna cost to do this options analysis? Are we talking $2,000 or $3,000, or we're gonna have to employ somebody, or is it just having discussions with the homeowner to see if they're amenable to considering the statutory right-of-way?
I didn't look it all up in the parks plan, but I know that there are things in the parks plan about improving access to.
I'm not
shore.
disputing that, I'm just wondering if this work it's got a budget line going with it, or if it's just staff time.
Maureen? Maureen?
And some of the questions, I don't object to somebody going and taking a look in the same way that somebody went and took a look at the trail down to September Morning Beach, or just a quick assessment and then getting a sense of
And then report back.
need to be done. But where I am sort of a wee bit concerned is I don't see where this fits in an annual parks work plan. I mean, it's an emergent thing. And I'm just cautious that there are quite a few emergent things that come out of parks.
One more thing is that when Bonnie did the parks plan that we approved, there are budget items in with all of those.
Yeah,
and
but I don't think that's reflected in the actual budget.
No, it wasn't, partly because Bonnie was away last year, and so we're coming into another budgeting year, and it might be a good idea to have a look and get a report from staff. A lot of work has been done already, including by the planning department, and if there's an option, I think we should just explore it. It was members of the neighborhood who came forward and asked, can it be reopened? Why isn't it reopened? Other neighborhoods have these things. So,
Well, why doesn't a lot of stuff happen on the island, and a lot of it doesn't happen because we don't have the money to do it, but I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that we should take a pretty high level look at it and just see what we can come back with, but
it's just ask staff to report back on options.
Yeah.
And there's no money being committed here, so I move this.
Okay, and who would that be, staff wise?
Oh, the parks.
Yeah.
I'll second it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? No? Okay, all in favor?
Thank you.
All right.
And the second one is about benches. Park staff get donors wanting to put benches up, sometimes with big plaques, sometimes with pre-existing markers or memorials installed in them, or different kinds of benches, and staff brings them to the committee, and the committee goes, well, we've looked at different kinds of benches, here's the kinds we've had, and so the committee in those minutes discussed guidelines and the need for a one-page policy to discuss the following parameters around signage. Some people want something very specific and very large, which will be different from the next bench down. Use of armrests, discouraging the use of old growth wood, encouraging locally sourced wood, material appropriate to the environment that doesn't rust or mold, use of a concrete slab, and the bench should be anchored, types of wood stains, preference given to local tradesmen tendering construction, and they are, the recommendation is a staff recommendation, actually, through the committee. The committee asked that council direct staff to make amendments to the public spaces naming and donor registration recognition policy to include guidelines for the things I just read, and the staff recommendation from Carla, I think, is that council refer the recommendation from the Parks, Trails, and Greenways Advisory Committee September 17th meeting in relation to the amendments to the Recreation and Community Services Commission for review and recommendation to council.
Why would you discourage old growth wood? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
Being they didn't want to, it was a recommendation of the committee that they not cut down big old trees in order to put out a park bench.
They're not gonna cut down a tree to make a park bench.
They're talking about use of old growth or purchase of old growth wood. It's just a recommendation.
Because I'm thinking like an artisan that's using an old growth stump or little chunks, that would be a good use of that wood.
Yeah. As I recall the discussion, it tended to be around things that were easy to maintain and were inexpensive and not too bulky for staff to move around in their little electric truck.
Well, I guess that's the other question I have was, I've been every time I go out with the grandkids or whatever, we're in a different park, I take pictures of the park benches and whatever. The concrete slab, you definitely need it so you can anchor it and it's easier to mow the grass around it. But none of them are using wood. The experience we've had out of the golf course, it's very expensive to maintain. It's out in the elements, you've got to sand it and redo it every year. And they're using this nice black benches, or they've got the artificial wood that looks like an Adirondack chair. So I think we need to look at the ongoing maintenance cost, because 2 years from now, it's going to need to be sanded and resealed, and who's going to do that and who's paying for that. So you need money to maintain these things. So.
This
Yeah,
is
the
why-
donation's fine.
This is partly why they're asking for guidelines, and they're talking about material appropriate to the environment that doesn't rust or mold.
But then you're talking about types of wood stain.
Maureen, go
Does
ahead.
it-
This doesn't belong in the public spaces naming and donor recognition policy. If you look at the policy, it's doing something quite different from this. If you want a policy about park benches or trail benches, develop a policy for park benches and trail benches. This is about naming.
Okay, but then
not about the actual physical object.
The reason it was put forward this way was because when donations come forward, they tend to be donations that people expect a plaque.
Sure, I get that, but it doesn't fit with this policy.
I think we need the plaque part too.
Yeah.
Well, you
That's
could
fine.
say the policy would follow the naming policy for the plaque.
Yeah,
Right.
and then you get all
But-
the detail
But the
about
standards of what it's going to go.
That's fine, that's fine. I think they and Carla, in the absence of Bonnie, were looking for a way to move this idea forward.
Yeah.
And this is the recommendations that they're sending to us, so we can do whatever we want.
I really do think just a policy that deals with the benches themselves, rather than trying to embed them in a policy that's intended for things like you've got a room or a building and you want to call it Bob Smith's building. It's not the same thing.
These are memorial benches,
Yeah.
so.
Well, no, they may not be.
Oh, well, that's a
I
little
mean,
different.
some of ours don't have any. For example, there's a bench down on the causeway, that artistic one. You know, there's benches outside the library, they don't have memorial things on them.
But that's Maureen's point, and it doesn't fit within this.
Well, that's fine. Then, shall I ask, if you'd like, this was just their idea, perhaps, how to move it forward with the new public spaces naming and donor recognition. That may have even been my idea, I can't remember. But if you'd like, we can refer it back to them and say, make a bench policy.
Or what we could do is council direct park staff to add to their work plan the development of a policy in relation to park bench dedication, including standards for material and construction, and report back to council.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Sure.
good.
Well, it's probably this, just this body hasn't been here.
Okay, I'll move that. Second.
That makes it under the
All in
easy.
favor? Yeah, sure.
Hope, did you get that?
Part of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to say it again.
I can listen back and get it, don't worry.
I think we moved.
It was very good.
Yeah.
It was
Okay,
moved.
any further
I thought-
discussion? All in favor? Thank you, that's unanimous.
Silly when I could pull it up today.
That was good, that was really good. I can't remember. Item 2, Councillor Municipal Trustee Kale.
Okay, during the course of our last Island Trust Trustees meetings here on Bowen Island, during the course of the 2-day meeting, the subject of the Bowen requisition was brought up. And towards the end of the meeting, we were approached by Peter Lapham to say he would be interested in having some discussions with us on the subject of the requisition. Fortunately, Gary was there and the subject came up and said, look, you know, I'd be prepared to talk to you about this. So, okay, fine, that's, I was glad to hear that was the case. And we kind of followed up last week in Vancouver, and we had a chance to meet with Peter Lapham. And I said, Peter, okay, well, look, you mentioned that we'd like to have a chance to discuss this with us. And he said, yes, I would. And he said there's a couple of things I'm going to ask you to do to make that happen. He said, firstly, he said if we're going to have a discussion, it would need he would appreciate a recommendation from council that both recognises the trust and endorses the fact that we would have some discussions on this subject. Fine. He also said something else. He said, if we had to come to some arrangement and some agreement, what he said, and he wasn't putting any conditions down, he said, well, what was really important to him is that approved by his exec and approved by our council would be something jointly agreed he could then take to the minister. That was very important to him, that it could be taken to the minister, jointly approved by this council and jointly approved by the trust, the trustees and the executive and the trustees. Okay, so far so good. So we said we would raise this motion that's in front of you. And I think the point I would like to make at this point is, at no point did we get with Peter Luckham into definite and finite and detailed discussions. It was just a statement, yes, he would like to talk to us, he'd be prepared to discuss the requisition and have discussions with us, and if we could agree something, he would want to have something that we could jointly take forward to the minister. I accept the fact that it is short on detail, but then normally if you're having an opening discussion or first discussions with anybody, it is fairly short on detail, because when you sit down, say, okay, my council or our council have authorised us to have this discussion, what are you looking at? You want to know that there's a willingness on both sides to have a discussion. And you want to know in the end game, when this is done, how does that go forward to become implemented? And so there has been nothing done in detail to say we should do it this way or we should do it that way. I fully recognise that if we're discussing the requisition, and shall we say it requires, so let's say he says he wants to work through the existing formula as it stands right now. Fine. Then we could have discussions based on the existing formula. We could ask Alison for her advice, because she's probably the authority on this. Or if he says, no, we would like to recommend we do it a different way. We don't know that. All we're asking for is to have really this first discussion with Peter Luckham, which of course we will report back, but we do at least have your full knowledge of the story so far. You understand what it is we're trying to do, and you said, yes, okay, go ahead, and you could have those discussions. And that's what the motion is proposing, to enable those discussions to go ahead. And I'm trying to make it as uncomplicated and trying desperately hard not to get into the weeds with over details, which I cannot provide, because at this stage, deliberately, that's not a place we're at. We're only speaking in initial general terms, which of course we would report back, and we can then take the conversation from there. So it's not to prejudice or commit you to anything that you may not agree with, but it is to have those opening discussions, which I think are important. And that's what we're asking your agreement on.
Yeah.
I don't know, Gary, you would, because I would only refer to Gary because he was there at some of those discussions with me, and I'm very glad, because there was two of us there with Peter Luckham, and in case if I missed anything you think is important or you want to add.
I would just confirm what you're saying. I had several conversations with Peter, and he's very keen to open up a negotiation on this. And he said it might go beyond the present parameters, who knows? But he said, we've got to make this work, and they did a review of our requisition and fell into their categories and everything, but he said, well, he didn't say that. But he said, that we might have to go down a different road or something like that. But he's very keen to have us settle this out, or at least be happy with our lot in the trust. And I told him, I said, we don't believe the trust. We have no ambition to do that. And you know, and he's very keen to make that happen. Sue Ellen?
So when you're saying we, I just want to make it clear, it's Michael and Gary,
Yeah.
and I wasn't part of any of those discussions.
Well, and Peter,
And Peter.
when I say
Yeah,
me.
sure, okay, and I called Peter today, because I
Good.
was surprised to find this on the agenda, and I checked with him, because in the whereas, it says, the third or fourth one down says, whereas Islands Trust Chair Peter Luckham has requested a formal council resolution. There's a few words missing there, and you said them, which is if the Islands Trust is to engage in further discussions.
Correct.
So it should say if.
Okay, well, let me get this slowly.
Yeah, it's right there. If the Islands Trust is to, he was on the ski and he called me on a very crackly cell
No,
phone.
if the Islands Trust, sorry, I might need your help on this note as well, before I get this backwards, sorry.
If the Islands Trust is to engage in further discussion, so just before the word
If the
engage.
IT is to engage,
Yes,
okay.
right, after the
Thank
council
you,
resolution.
yeah, thank you, got it.
And just above that, where it says the Islands Trust Council engaged in discussion, that's okay, but I just want people to know that what that was we received at Trust Council part 3 of the fulsome reporting that's been going on. This is called the Bowen Island Municipal Tax Levy Analysis Part 3. And there hasn't been time, because that was only a week and a half ago, there hasn't been time for this to get onto the Bowen Council agenda yet. And but I will read out the conclusion. So this is the culminating third part. Islands Trust staff conclude that no expenditure allocations have been identified as inappropriate in the Islands Trust budget as per the Islands Trust Act and the Trust Council policy. Consequently, no recommendation for a change in the calculation of the municipal tax requisition has been made. Items of potential interest and further consideration have been highlighted for Trust Council, because this was a report going to them. So there's a few things in this report. And so my feeling is that this might be a little early. I also want to refer to a motion that council passed back in 25th of March. This council, that council directs staff to provide a report detailing the municipality's rights and legal obligations with respect to the Islands Trust requisition. And this, I think, was waiting for these reports, because the Islands Trust was doing all this work. Anyway, my suggestion is that the next steps might be that council have this on the next council meeting, so everybody on council has a chance to read it.
There's two more that they should all be.
And the other two, that's right. And maybe we could take advantage of our staff and ask for BIM staff to report back with any recommendations. Like, I would like Raj to have a look through all these, or whoever.
Oh, it's basically said that the requisition's fine.
Yeah, but there's, well, the requisition's fine. Then what are we talking about?
Well, why can't you understand the fact that we want to open up a conversation beyond this report?
Beyond the 3 reports that you.
Well,
Yes.
I thought council might want to receive this and then have staff create a report so we can have staff's eyes on it. And then you see whether you want to go into more of what is time consuming, and the conclusions so far have been that there's nothing wrong with it.
We plan to go beyond this report.
If authorized by council.
If possible, I mean, this is what we're trying to open up.
Have we seen that? So we haven't seen it. I don't think
Basically, Julia Moss did an excellent job, and she went to exhaustive levels to go through this really very involved calculation which forms the basis for the requisition. And her very detailed calculation said, yes, according to the requisition and the letter of the law, everything has been properly done, and as far as that formula is concerned, it has been properly applied.
Correct.
And
absolutely.
we've never actually seriously doubted, given the slightest margin, that would ever be the case. As Gary said, our discussions with Peter Luckham were not to cast any doubts or aspersions onto that report, which Julia Moss meticulously checked with us, but to take the conversation beyond that and say, okay, we we believe you. We believe you've got the thing absolutely right according to the formula. Now, can we sit down and have some discussions, please?
Talk about changing
and
the
that's
formula.
that's what
Are
we're
you talking
asking.
about changing the formula?
Yes.
Ah,
Changing the formula in the act? Or
Oh, you-
changing
I don't know
how
where it's,
they
I
allocate the
don't know where it's
cost.
going, but obviously the formula that we have, this is the conclusion. It doesn't make a lot of people really happy. So, we're just gonna, what we wanna do is enter into discussion and see if there's any avenue where, you know, we can go down and try to remediate this thing and try to
Alright,
bring it
so-
up to date.
I've got a few points.
Okay.
In the third whereas, they didn't really, from what I sort of observed and heard, enter into discussion at trust council. So I think that wording needs to be received a
Part three
report
fund.
from the whatever Julia's
Yeah.
title is, regarding MIN's financial requisition. And you might want to, and
Sorry, could you just give me the wording again?
received reports from Julia Mobbs, and insert her title. Received a report from Julia Mobbs on the
receive
Bowen
the
requisition.
Part 3,
Where
new
does that
tax
get-
levy report.
where does that
Instead of
get
this,
inserted?
instead of
Delete
deletion.
engaged in discussion and insert that.
Receive
We can pass it.
Part 3 of the BIM tax levy
And
analysis.
the other, and then the fourth sort of, or second key thing is, Peter's asked for a resolution from council to request the trust to engage in discussions.
Correct.
And that resolution is not here. So you need to say, therefore, be it resolved, the Bowen Island Municipal Council requests the Islands Trust to engage in discussions with Bowen Island Municipality regarding the financial requisition formula.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't mind modifying it.
Absolutely.
And
Hope. I'm
then
sorry
you
if you
leave
called that
the
one.
last one is therefore be it resolved, the council authorize, whoever,
Yeah.
mayor and/or councilors, Islands trustees, Kale and Fast to engage in discussions with the Islands Trust regarding the financial requisition formula.
Sorry, Allison, can we just go back to
And report back to council.
where you were just at a minute ago and just take it piece by piece? Just 'cause it's getting kind of late, we're all.
Therefore, be it resolved,
The
that Bowen
council
Island
request, the Islands Trust.
Municipal Council requests the Islands Trust to engage in discussion with Bowen Island Municipality regarding the financial requisition formula.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
And just a little bit of wordsmithing in
Yeah.
the first paragraph.
Yeah, don't you think?
Maureen, is ongoing and continuous seem to be the same words to me.
Because you also had
I've dropped
inserted
the
after
adjectives.
fast,
Okay,
if
hang on, Michael.
the IT is to this.
Yeah, the other little change, you might have got it earlier, was in the whereas, that is, whereas the Islands Trust Chair Luckham has requested
Yeah.
a formal council resolution, there needs to be an insert there. If the Islands Trust is to engage in, you got
Yeah,
that?
got that.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
just checking.
And then in
Well,
the
thank you,
first
thank you.
paragraph, the first whereas, Maureen's, I think, agreeing with me, ongoing and continuous are kind of duplications. Whereas the Bowen Island Municipal Council values its partnership with the Islands Trust, yeah. Okay.
So you're taking out, it's ongoing and
Ongoing and continuous.
Okay.
And ongoing and continuous mean the same thing.
Yeah, that's dramatic, yeah, fine, perfect.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Sure.
A wordsmithing question. Would it be appropriate for the CEOs to be part of this conversation?
Yes, it would. And that was something, Michael vetted this through me, and he had asked that CFOs and CAOs be involved.
Yeah, I would actually welcome that. The more, on this initial thing, so we've got it taped, we can come back to you with something that looks more solid. I'm looking for your concurrence here.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think it's important if we proceed with this, that staff be involved.
Yes.
So, so the Islands Trust processes is usually staff to staff and elected official to elected official. So I'm wondering for the first step, do we want to request staff to engage
But
with staff?
what would we engage in? This is a political discussion, this isn't an operational discussion.
Okay,
So I think it needs to be a political discussion with staff support.
Yeah. frankly would welcome, as a proposer of this, I would welcome that amendment, because.
Yeah, no, I was
put
just
it
trying
out
to
there.
clarify what
Yeah.
the right levels were to.
So would it catch
Where is
that?
that going?
Yep,
The C,
councils.
I got it.
you got it.
Oh, thank you.
Could, sorry, could we, if, are you?
Ready to read the whole thing?
You're cut off. No.
Is it done now? Is it done?
I'll read it if you
Okay, thank you, I really appreciate that, bouncing back and forth.
Stop me if I miss something. Whereas Bowen Island Municipal Council values its partnership with the Islands Trust, and whereas concerns have been expressed regarding the fairness of Bowen Island Municipality's financial requisition to the Islands Trust.
From the Islands Trust. They requisition from us.
Okay, thank you. And whereas at its meeting held September 17th to 18th, 2019, the Islands Trust Council received Part 3 of the BIM tax levy report regarding BIM's financial requisition. And whereas the Islands Trust Chair Luckham has requested a formal council resolution if the Islands Trust is to engage in further discussions regarding BIM's requisition formula, therefore be it resolved that council requests the Islands Trust to engage in discussions with Bowen Island Municipality regarding the financial requisition formula, and that council authorize Mayor Ander, councillors / Islands Trust municipal trustees Kayla Fast and CAO Lalonde to engage in discussions with Islands Trust regarding
And CFO.
And CFO.
Oh.
CAO.
But did you say senior staff?
And senior staff.
Yeah, so probably will.
Okay. Staff to engage in discussions with Islands Trust regarding the financial requisition formula and to report back to council.
On with that.
I want one change, I want ongoing put back in.
In the
And I don't
first,
need both, but I'd like to have one of them.
We had it, I put it
I
in
know,
there.
I know,
Begin with,
and
because
I agreed with Allison that they were kind of the same, but I'd like one of those words.
I think in fairness, it was for emphasis.
Yeah,
it's ongoing partnership.
Ongoing part.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, sorry.
That was moved,
Any further
Councillor-
discussion?
Do we have a seconder?
We don't have a
Oh,
second.
we don't have a seconder.
Want to have a second? Oh, I'll second it.
Okay.
I'll call it food,
Ongoing discussion?
I just think whereas all this work has been done by the Islands Trust already, and it's shown no unfairness, and this proposal is about engaging discussions about fairness, I think it's a waste of time, and that's why I will be voting not in favor of doing this anymore.
So all the words that were presented by the people that spoke there, and the letters we received, is it fairness or is it quantum?
Amount.
Oh. Oh.
I think it ends up being both, in people's minds.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, I think everything I heard last Tuesday
Fairness.
was quantum. They complained about the amount.
Well. Yeah, but it's the amount is the unfairness. I mean, I don't know.
In the spirit of moving this forward, I actually don't mind
You can change it.
which word you use or both.
Well, why don't we just say regarding Bowen Island Municipality's financial requisition from the Islands Trust?
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
In fact, if anything, I think grammatically it will get smoother.
Sorry, where is that?
Delete the
Regarding
fairness law in the second
There's
whereas.
concerns have been expressed regarding
Bowen
Bowen
Island
Island
Municipality.
Municipality's financial requisition right up near the top.
So replace that with, sorry, like,
Ditch it.
just ditch it all together.
Yeah.
No, ditch the fairness
Ditch
law.
fairness, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, ditch the whole thing.
Ditch the fairness, yeah. So just whereas concerns have been expressed regarding Bowen Island Municipality's financial requisition from the Islands Trust.
Yep.
All we're doing is getting permission to enter into a negotiation with Peter Lucker.
Discussion.
High level, and see where it goes. Who knows where it goes. He's keen on it, I'm keen on it, so we'll see, kind of make something work here. Okay, so, we have a first and a seconder, and I'll ask a question, all in favor? Okay, and opposed? 2 in opposition.
Guys, I gotta go. I'll skip the other.
You're not gonna miss too much.
Oh, come on, this is the Metro Vancouver.
I know.
I gotta get up at 4.
All righty, thank you. Take care, Rob. See you, Mark.
So it's time.
All right, 11.2, David Hawking.
Okay. So I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but at the, on the board meeting agenda, where is it? Here we are. This Friday, the first item is that the Metro Vancouver Board directs staff to include in the 2020 affordable housing budget a $4 million tax requisition for the purpose of dedicated funding for new MVHC affordable housing development projects on lands owned by MVRD member jurisdictions. So basically, and what they'll be doing, if this passes, it'll amount to $4 a person, basically, on the average home. They'll be able to build about 50 units a year, 500 in 10 years. Wow. And there'll be an RFP going out in the new beginning 2020, asking what municipalities are interested.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm voting for it unless anyone tells me that this is a terrible
absolutely.
idea. And I'm presuming it will go forward, but we'll see.
Perfect.
Do you expect any opposition?
I've heard some people grumping about additional taxes, but it's hard to grump about $4 when you're talking about the biggest issue.
Yeah,
I would have thought.
It's $4 per average property.
Per average property.
Our average property is higher than the average property in Metro. So,
$6.
might be $6.
Might be $6.
Our average property.
One less coffee.
All right, 11.3, funds trustees, Fast and Kale, update.
Okay, I've got a couple
Come
of
on.
things. One of them is that the Trust Council has opened its public consultation, its update of the trust policy statement, and that's the one called Islands 2050. Some of you may have encountered them on the ferry. Some of you came to the open house on the previous Monday. And there's an online consultation that I assume will be coming to you. And so just let people know if they've got concerns about the Islands Trust, they can go and have their say. And including concerns about climate change or concerns about sustainability about water, like we heard this weekend at the farming, any of those things. As part of this, I wanted everybody to know that the Islands Trust has updated their Bowen Island Municipality page on the Islands Trust website. So there's links to lots of things that Islanders can go and find themselves in the Islands Trust webpage, things that the Trust does that are really difficult to find on the municipal website, including those 3 reports about the Bowen tax levy and maps and things like that that people might be interested in. It's just along the top, there's a tab that says Islands. Bowen is one of the first ones. There's on number 1311 in the info items, there's 4 or 5 items there. Internet connectivity, a couple of things I just mentioned. Trust Council was here on Bowen. David Marr about the Bowen Island Steamship Marina, and the Trust Conservancy Reconciliation Declaration. And that's all I'm going to talk about. There's more.
Michael, any comments?
No, just to be brief, it was an extremely invigorating meeting. Probably of the 4th, it was the most exciting, most interesting I've attended, and I think the most progressive. I haven't had the minutes yet, so unless I'm actually going to be severely castigated by my council colleagues for not going on further, I'll probably wait till I get the minutes.
You know what? I don't think they want us to go back further down. But I
I-
have the notes if anybody wants to. By the way, at the banquet, Islands Trust and Bowen Island municipalities sat together. It was fun.
Yeah.
Sorry we missed you. Yes.
Yes.
That's it.
All right, thank you.
Good times.
Councilor Michael.
The Parks Committee met on
Yes.
the 18th of September, and we had 2 really excellent presentations. It was a packed meeting, both the open and the closed. A professor from Simon Fraser, Deborah Harford, who is with the Adaptation to Climate Change team, presented on some work that she is doing on behalf of Metro Vancouver. And they're taking what she called a transboundary approach. So they're looking across the municipalities and it's focused on green infrastructure. Bowen wasn't very high on her radar, and I said, you may be thinking transboundary, but we're within Metro, and we're unique, and are you going to come and talk to us, because we're looking at municipal, the natural assets program, we're looking at conservation development, we're looking at revising our green building policy, and she said, invite me, and she said, we have research capacity in the coming year. They've been funded, they're doing this work on behalf of Metro through the planning committee. So I have sent her a message. We haven't connected at this point for further discussion, but it was a great presentation, and it's uploaded on the Metro site. The second person who spoke was another professor, Lawrence Frank, from the School of Population and Public Health at UBC. And he has a report called Where Matters. And in speaking with the Parks Committee, what he was dealing with was walkability, transportation, and park access. And he dove into park access quite deeply with us. And some of his research involves what he called the monetization of park space in terms of our health. So he has data layers where you can look at how many parks are in a community and relate that to the
Healthcare savings. Yeah.
Exactly. And you can also look at the data in terms of walkability of the community and healthcare. So it's linked to people's medical records somehow, but the data is available throughout the region. Staff would request it, and I think really exciting thing is that he's working with the folks who produce the My Healthy Communities survey, and he's going to be doing this work on an ongoing basis. So it provides all sorts of potential rationales for park space is valuable for your health, park space is valuable for walkability, and so on. Anyway, it's a great report. It's uploaded, and unfortunately they don't video record their meetings, which I think is a real shame.
But it's 12.14 in
the package. Great. And the other thing I just wanted to, the last thing I wanted to mention is that on the Metro agenda for this Friday's board meeting, there is a recommendation from Regional Parks that the board directs staff to include in the Regional Parks 2020 budget an additional contribution of $4 million to advance the Regional Park Acquisition Reserve Fund and include an additional $4 million increase annually until 2024. It's a very significant chunk of money to further their land acquisition policy, and also to support the park development. It was very clear among the committee members that it couldn't just be about acquiring more, it had to be doing more with what we already had. So there's a bylaw amendment related to that part. But one of the things that came out of that discussion, and it may relate to the housing recommendation, was that when people are asked, would you be prepared to pay a bit more for parks, they generally kind of like that. It's something specific. So the recommendation was that Metro Vancouver provide a breakdown of the requisition to show the dollar figure that is going to parks and to show that on the tax bills. And I think it would be wise to do the same thing with housing, because the requisitions, if these recommendations go through, our requisition will go up. But if people realize that it's going up, not for general administrative costs, but because there's a chunk of cash going to parks and a chunk of cash going to housing, that it might be more palatable as an increase. And it will be a gigantic amount of money for parks. It'll be comparable to the housing amount. But if we request, if Bowen Finance requests from Metro, they will give us that breakdown. And a number of other municipalities are requesting that as well.
That's a great idea.
It is a good idea.
That's my
We have a
report.
problem with it.
I heard that good news, yeah.
Okay, Allison.
Okay, it was last Friday, I think. No, a week ago Friday. So the last Mayor's Council, there was some interesting discussion about micro-mobility. And so there's people that, the shared bikes fits in that definition. But there's private companies getting into it and, okay, so they're looking at and working through with the staff from other groups, and it goes to RTAC. What do we should have a common set of standards on, you can't just drop this thing on the sidewalk and disappear. And the other thing that's really showing up is the little scooters, kind of stand on it. And those, of course, are so small, and they don't want them littering the sidewalk and somebody tripping over them. And so trying to be prepared when the rental companies for those things start popping up. So that was quite interesting. Got, update reports of things, and there was also a report on TransLink tomorrow, which was our little pilot bus. But of course, at that point, it hadn't finished. So we just got a very brief report. There's a Vanpool prototype going on. They've reinvigorated the Vanpool program, and so they've got one going at UBC, and then we're the on-demand microtransit prototype on Bowen. To help us learn to develop appropriate solutions for communications, customer interface. And so they had actually a couple of comments in here. They had an average of 3.3 passenger boardings per hour on weekdays, evenings, and 4.3 on the weekend. 1,300 accounts were created over the first 38 days, and approximately 1,200 riders completed 750 boardings. So
Just Bowen?
yeah, this is our little micro park.
Yeah.
1,300 accounts, wow.
Yeah, so there was, the survey out, and it closed yesterday.
Yep.
So we'll hear more about, and then there's some Moto, Evo, Mobi things. And then there was a nice presentation on the Beeline update. And they rebranded the buses. They're now called Rapid Bus, so they look different from the other buses. So if you've noticed this bright green thing, I think, downtown.
Oh, wow.
And all the mess in North Van is them working on the Park Royal to Fibs rapid bus line, and they've got new stop identifications and things like that. So they don't stop as frequently as the other ones, and they'll be much better on-time performance when's the next bus stop coming, and handicap accessible and everything else. So I think, and then UBC SkyTrain and George Massey, the SkyTrain update, those routes got in the paper. So, and then we got just a very quick update on the George Massey crossing, which was unfinished business from July 25th. So it was old news by then too, so because that had gone out in the press. So that was, and then an interesting discussion about electric buses. They've got to replace 600 buses over the next decade. I can read my handwriting here. And they've got some electric buses now, but there was a lot of discussion. And the biggest issue is the charging stations. And if you do these on-street ones, they run around $100,000 each. They're not cheap. And then trying to do the bus, are you going to charge them at night in the bus depot, or are you going to, do some of them have to be charged on the street? So there's a lot more research. It's not as simple as going out to buy an electric bus.
Wow. Raising level 3 DC charging.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There was just discussion about there's different kinds of charging. So do they need to just have a quick charge on the street for some of them? Or can they have the slower charge overnight in the depot? And then they've been working with Hydro, but clarifying the infrastructure needs for the electric buses is what's being worked on. Yeah.
All right. Was that it, Allison? Thank you.
And the various different political parties have been responding with money for transit and so forth. So,
I'm sure they have.
yeah.
Good time to know.
Yeah. So that's it.
Okay, so we got 11.6 UBC and then
Yeah,
climate change, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention For the press who's still hanging in here, that
Sure is.
one of the councillors were at the Union of BC Municipalities. We had a couple of meetings with BC Hydro and with Forestry, very positive, upbeat
Transportation.
meetings, I would say. Yes, transportation, sorry. And also near the end, and there were a bunch of resolutions passed which tell local governments communicating to the province if they want more action about climate and all kinds of things. Huge big book here full of resolutions. And one of them was, last minute one, the province had kind of put on hold the most current grant applications for the Rural Dividend Fund. And we know a couple of groups in our community have applied for that. So the resolution to, therefore be it resolved that UBCM request the province to reconsider the decision to reallocate funds, that passed almost unanimously. And in the Premier's speech at the end, it sounds like something might happen there. So,
Well, he said
in the next few months.
he's canceled it as of that, but he's put it, it's not been canceled, it's put on hold.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So-
it sounded like it could be back sooner.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention 3 of us at the end were still there at the end, and we went outside the building, and there were some of these young climate protesters having a press conference and making speeches. It was exciting and very uplifting. And then the 3 of us got on the subway with all the people carrying the signs and went to City Hall and saw the beginning of the climate march. Well, we went underground on the march, and then I came back and went to a library meeting, but these folks hung out.
I went on the walk.
It was very uplifting, and I got to report to the library about the discussion on the library. Anyway, I just wanted to let people know that the climate march was very uplifting, and there were lots of Bowen Islanders there that kept bumping into it.
That was the Bowen Island Climate
Yeah.
March.
Oh, yeah.
It was awesome because all the kids got on the ferry. I don't know, was anybody else there? No. There, all the kids got on the ferry, I think it was on the IPS game, and they all had their signs and everything. And the rest of us were all on the dock cheering them on, and it was quite impressive.
Yeah, Wilton flew from the ferry.
Oh, did he? Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, the people on the dock.
The BC Bowen Transportation Society bus load of them.
Oh,
50
good.
people.
Excellent.
Yep.
We have to go back to a closed meeting.
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Sure, and I can't go home, my ride's very meeting.
But first, we gotta have, is that it?
My
Simone?
sentiments.
Thank you.
Question
Question period.
Norman.
Come on, grill us.
Oh, well, I'll have a question.
Thank you for hanging in there, Ron.